Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to the Invoice with Profit. In this week's training, I'm going to show you how to create this incredible service invoice, complete with calculated labor costs, calculated item costs, an amazing profit, and we're going to do it all from scratch. It's going to be an incredible training. I cannot wait. So let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining me. I've got a really exciting training this week. Now, we've created invoices in the past, but never like this, because what's more important than an invoice? Knowing how much money you actually made on that invoice. That's what we're going to be going over today. I want to know the costs. I want to know how much we sold. What did it cost us? What did our actual labor cost us? The money we invested in our technicians. So I'm going to show you how to do all that this week, how to create your own one. We're going to do it from scratch. We're going to be starting with a blank sheet, and we're going to be creating this invoice together. So I'm going to show you every step of the way, every line of code, formula, format, and function, all with you today. So I'm really excited on this training. I bring you these each and every Tuesday, absolutely free. Even this workbook is free. All you need to do is click the links down below, either with your email or your Facebook Messenger. We're going to get that sent over right to you. If you do like these trainings, there are many ways to support them and keep them free each and every week for all of us. The first is with our Patreon campaign. Our Patreon members get exclusive benefits nobody else gets, such as early workbooks, PDF code books, which display all the code. All the icons and pictures you see in these trainings come that in the resources package. You also get exclusive details on our upcoming sales and recurring information on that. We've got lots and lots of benefits there on our Patreon campaign. For just a few dollars a month, that's a great way to support us. So we've got lots of things for you there. Also, if you like these workbooks, I do have a pack of 200 workbooks, and that's on sale for just $77. That's some great ways to support us and keep these trainings for free. All right, we're going to get started. This is a sample, so this is exactly what we're going to build. We'll be able to save it. We'll be able to create a new invoice. We'll be able to load previously saved invoices just by entering the invoice number here. We're going to be able to track items. We're going to have item types. We will also have service types. We'll be able to select labor for specific employees, and then we're going to be able to determine the cost of those employees. We're going to be able to calculate that all in this amazing graph. We'll be able to know the profit. We'll be able to know the total cost and, of course, the total sales. All of that is going to be available to us for each and every invoice. So we're going to create this live. We're going to have dynamic tax and total. So we're going to be able to create the total. We'll show you how to create this really cool invoice background. We'll be using conditional formatting, some simple formulas, advanced filters. So I've got so much in this training. All right, so this is the sample. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save that in case we made any changes. And I'm going to put that away right now. And we're going to start off with this blank sheet here. Now, this blank sheet, of course, is going to be our invoice. Now, what else is in this? Of course, we have an invoice list. That's going to track all the invoices that we previously created, right? We've got invoice items. These are the individual items that are going to go on the invoices themselves, right? We also have a list of customers. We're going to be able to create and add new customers. Forgot that to show you in a pop-up. And also, that's going to be a bonus coming up, since I forgot to mention it. And we've got the technicians, different technicians. How do we calculate their actual hourly costs? We're going to be going over that. That's really cool. And also, we've got an item list, a list of items, right? And the cost of those individual items and the price that we're selling those individual items. And then, of course, we got a cool calendar pop-up, which I'm going to be showing you. In fact, let's bring back that sample. Let me just show you. We've got a really cool calendar pop-up, and I wanted to show you that, and a cool customer pop-up. We're going to be able to add customers dynamically, just like this. So I wanted to show you that. That's kind of important. And so we'll save that. That's going to add it. So we've got that cool coming up. I'll close the sample. Just wanted to show you that briefly. All right, let's get to it. On this invoice, what are we going to start out with? We're going to start out with our first two columns. Those are going to be for admin. So I'm going to color those gray. I'm going to pin this here, and I want to color those gray. Those are going to be our admin columns, right? Those are going to be eventually hidden, right? I've got a set of probably some formulas that we're going to need, and so I'm going to give these a specific color. I want to use some specific cells for some formulas and some functions that are going to help us moving forward, and so we're going to put those right in here. And then what I want to do is I want to color this blue for our invoice, right? I want to create a kind of a blue color here, but on the header, and then our invoice is probably going to be E through J, and we're going to go all the way down to, so let's say, about 34 on those. So I want to put a background on those just so we get some kind of framework for around our invoice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a border around there just so we know where our invoice is. And I'm going to choose a little bit of a thick border, and I'll go with maybe a dark blue on this, and then we'll just go all the way around. That way we kind of have an understanding of where invoice is going to go. The rest of that, I'm just going to give it this blue background here. I'm going to give it a little bit of a blue color. We'll just go all the way to, let's say that's a bit too far, all the way to Z is sufficient for our purposes here. And then I'm going to format those and just give it a little bit of a fade out color, not too much. So we're going to go probably with one of our primary colors here, and then down to our second color here, which we'll use. So just this is sufficient. Then we're going to create our background color at that remaining. So our background color, we're going to highlight all this. And then what I'm going to do is just those first two rows, I'm going to hold down the control, and I'm going to continue the rest of it down here, and then also down here. So that just kind of gives it a good background here that we're going to cover. Okay, so now I'm going to cover this blue color here, which is going to be, let's call it this lighter color. All right, and now I'm going to give it that primary background color, which is this one right here, and then we're good to go on that. Okay, so we've got our background color, and we've got our basic invoice here. So we're going to put that in there. Now what I'd like to do is give it a title and give it some information. So I'm going to add some shapes. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add our main shape. So I'm going to insert a shape here, and then that shape's going to be for our title. So I'm going to enter a text box here, and that's going to be for we're going to call this service invoice. So I'm going to do caps lock service invoice, and since that's the title of it, we're going to give that a bit bigger. I'm going to format that, right? I'm going to put no outline on that, and we're going to put no fill on that. We also want to increase the font here to about, let's say, 22, and then we're going to make it bold and italic, and we're going to give it maybe one of the darker colors here. So something like that, service invoice. Okay, that should be sufficient here, and we'll drop this up here. We won't be using grid lines here, so I'm going to do the view, and we don't need those grid lines. I want to show that. And what I also like to have is some company address here. So our company address is going to go in the upper right. So I'm going to insert shapes here, and then inside that one another text box, but we'll do a larger text box around here, and that is where we're going to have our information. So I'm going to put Fredders. This is our company name, Garage, and then a new line. So I'm going to do enter, and then we'll do 123 Main Street, and that'll give it the address, and then Anytown, USA, and then just give it a zip code. So that's sufficient there. We have a zip code there. And also what I want to do is put in a phone number here. So let's add a phone number there. And then what we'll do is we'll format that. It's a little bit big, so we'll make it smaller here. And then we'll do 310-555-1212. Okay, so that's sufficient for the phone number. Now let's add the font. We want to make it a smaller font. I don't want it quite that size. So we'll do it something about 10. Okay, so we'll do a 10. We don't need 11. And then I do want to make it bold. I want to make it colored, right? I want to give it that same color. And then we'll expand it here. And then also I want to do it italicized here. And also we have too much spacing around that. So what I want to do is I'm going to right click that, go to the format, the shape, and then we'll go to the text box, and I'm just going to remove any padding around that. We don't need any margins or padding around that. So that's going to help us. It's not necessary. And then just increase that. That looks good. Okay. And that looks good. So now we've got our firm. Now what we want to do is we want to add some logos and some information. Here I want to put the invoice number. So inside invoice number, and then that invoice number is going to go in J. So below that, let's go down, put an invoice date, and then an invoice date. So that invoice date will go here. Let's just say 131, right? And then we'll format that a little bit. And then what I want to do is I want to write justify these, but I'll do one more. I also want to put the invoice status here. We're going to be creating an invoice status. So I'm going to take all three of these, and I'm going to right justify those. And I'm going to take all three of these, and I'm going to left justify those. I'm going to format this as a short date. So that'll be fine. I like that here. So our invoice number will go here. And let's say our status will go here. This will create a drop-down list of statuses that we can choose. Here, we don't need a border on that. So we can, again, no fill here. And then what we'll do is no outline here. All right, so we also going to put a logo here, and we also want a customer address, right? We want to put that customer. That customer address is probably going to go into G5, the customer name, and then 6 and 7 will be the address, and then 8 we're going to put in all of our headers. So we're going to start our headers off right here. So this will be the description, and then we're going to have the tech. Here's going to be the text Technician, we want to know who the could be a technician or it could be an item name. So we'll put /item. Could be either one of those. Previously back, I want to put the date if there's a service date on that, an item type on that. Let's capitalize that just as we are. Item type. Okay, previously before that, I want to do the item ID. Item ID. I want to know what is the ID of that. And then also I want to know the invoice item row. Invoice item row. What does that mean? That's going to be the row where it's stored. Remember, we have a set of invoice items. I want to know that row 3, 4, 5, or 6. Where is it stored on our database? So we're going to put that directly inside here. All right, so beyond the description, I also want the quantity. What is the quantity of how many of that? And then I also want to know the amount, the original amount and the total for that line item. Also, I want to know the item cost. This will not be printed, right? The cost will not be printed, so it's off. And I also want to know the total cost. So the customer will see this when we print it out, and the admin, we will see this. So I think that's going to be perfect. So I'm just going to give those some nice borders, some colored borders. I'm going to format those cells and use that same blue, that darker blue. So I'm going to use that border. And to give it that a little bit thicker line here, we'll use this. Actually, this is sufficient here. This color, and then we'll go all the way around with the outline. I think that'll be sufficient. And then also I want to bold the font here. All right, so that's good. And then just center it and give it a little bit of color here. So we're going to center that. And then I'm going to format those cells. And then what we'll do is we'll use a fade color. So I'm going to use the fill here and then fill effects. And we're going to use our two primary colors here that we've been using, which is the darker one into the lighter one. Those are almost the same here, but they're a little bit close. And then so let's go with this lighter one here. I like that better. Okay, so there we go. So now we've got this little fade out here. It's a little more obvious. Okay, so we've got our primary. So I want to put inside F5, I'm going to put here the customer. And we're almost ready to create our button. So that customer name will go in a drop-down list right here. We're going to right justify that. Customer name, the address, and that. Okay, so we've got it primarily, and we'll put some lines around here, and I also want the totals to go in here. So here, right, I want to put, we have 3 lines. So I'm going to put the subtotal here, subtotal. Then I'm going to put the tax here. Now this will be temporary because we're going to change that name, and the total here is going to go. So we've got the total, the subtotal, and the tax are here. We're going to right justify those, bold them, and then the amounts are going to go here. So these are going to be all amounts. So we'll put those in here. This will be a sum. So I'm going to put borders around here. So format those cells. Sorry, it's off the screen. Bring in the borders up here. And what I'd like to do is I want to have the left and the top border, maybe the thin border. Let's go with a thin border on this and the top and then the middle. Not that, right here and right here. Okay, let's take a look at that. I like that. And then what I want to do is here, I want to have a footer message. So I'm going to put a border inside here. Let's scroll up a little bit so you can see that, what I'm doing here. Format those cells here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put that thin border right up the top. Now this we can use a merge and center. So our footer message is going to go right here. And we're going to go merge and center this. And I'm going to go to the left and the top. So we can put something like in thank you for your business. I like that. Now we just need to bold it and italicize it, make it maybe a little bit bigger. Okay, that looks nice. So that's a good footer. We're going to be, this tax line will be dynamic based on the tax that we're charging, okay? And then the rates here, so we'll be adding that in more. Let's going to add some lines in here, some breakpoint lines, so we can separate those columns here on the invoice. So I'm going to format those cells just as we've been doing. And I'm going to use this same color, but we're going to separate it with this dotted line here on the left top, not this one, not that one, but this one here. Okay, so I like that. There we go. That looks nice. Now we got a good framework. Let's save our work. We got an idea of what we want to do. I'm going to add, just to make things a little bit easier to read, I'm going to add some conditional formatting here. So I'm going to hold, so actually we'll go to here. So all the lines that we're going to have, and I'm going to add some conditional formatting here. Let's hold down the control once again. The shift to go here, the control for non-adjacent cells, and then down here on holding down the shift. So now we've got 2 sets of cells. And what I want to do is I want to format those cells based on what is located inside here and based on odd or even. So we're going to add, actually we don't need to we can format out, let's add a border in here, just the center border. That should be sufficient just as we did previously. And what I also would like to do is add some conditional formatting in here. So conditional formatting, new rules, and it's going to be based on 2 conditions. So using a formula, we're going to use equals. And again, 2 conditions. The first condition is C and whatever row, so we're going to remove the absolute from that, should not be blank. does not equal empty. Another condition is must be on an odd or even row, right? So I'm going to do mod. That's our auto hotkey that automatically typed it in. Now this is going to be for even rows because it ends in a 0. So for this, what do I want to do? Well, I just want to add a little bit of a lighter color so that we can show those alternating. I'm going to give it a fill and maybe a little bit of a lighter color. So we've got some colors here, but we want to notice use some recent colors. So our recent colors are located right here in fill effects. So we're going to choose one of these lighter colors, like let's say this one here, and that's a little bit lighter color. So that's our lighter color. So we can find that in the recent and click OK. Now nothing's going to change on that because we haven't added any data, but as soon as we start adding some data, we can see that we have a nice alternating row, and that's what I want, just a nice look so we can alternate it. Okay, very good. So that's looking good. I like the way that that looks, and what I want to do is just give it a border around here because we're going to have specific items that are going to be centered. So I'm just going to put a border around this here, there, and now inside here what we're going to have is we're going to have these databases. So it doesn't necessarily matter what the look is here, but we do want to make sure it's separate. So I'm going to give this kind of a lighter gray. This is going to be for admin purposes only. We'll be able to hide these two columns. So our invoice is coming together here. We got an idea of what we want, but I also want to know, we want to be able to search an invoice. So we want a user input field. So we're going to color that white. And we're going to call it search invoice. Let's spell that right. So our search invoice is going to be here. We can move that to the middle here and then right justified all wouldn't matter. Okay, what else I want? I want to know the service sales, right? So what's the total service? I want to get some totals. So let's put something in here, invoice totals. So I want those totals, as you may have seen in the sample, invoice totals here. We're going to merge and center that here. We're going to bold it. We're going to put some borders around it here. So any border. Okay, so now here, I want those totals to appear here. So first is going to be our service sales. I want to know how many sales we did, service sales. What is the total? And I want to know the item sales. How many items did we sell? I also want to know the service cost. What is the cost, our actual cost of that service, our employees' cost? And I want to know the item cost. And I also want to know the total profit. What is the total profit that we made on this specific invoice? Okay, so now let's just give it all borders here, and then I'm going to use the double line here on the top because it's a total. So we're going to use this double line right in here, and we're going to put it on the top. Good. I like the way that that looks. That's going to give us some consistency. We can just kind of color that a little bit of our lighter accent color, which is here, to stand it out a little bit. So we know that we're going to be putting in. Now we know the service sales, our item type, whether it's service or item, is going to be here. So we're going to base those totals. But let's get some data in here first. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to create a customer drop-down list. Now we know we have a customer list here. And I've created already a few named ranges that'll help us move things along. So if we take a look inside the formulas and name manager, we see that we have something called client name, okay, our customer name. That would work. Let's change that. I just want to keep consistent. I'm going to change that to customer name. I just want something a little bit more consistent. Customer name, okay? And that's basically our names on our clients and our customers. So click OK. And then I'm going to close it. So what I want to do now is create a drop-down list. So data validation here, but I also want the user to be able to enter additional information if it doesn't exist. So I'm going to unselect this, right? That means they can put in any value they want. There's no rules. And the reason is because they may want to add a new one. So what I'm going to do here is going to put in equals customer name. And that's the one. So now when we drop down list, we have a drop down list of customer names. That's customer names. Again, taking a quick look, are in here. There's using an offset formula based on B2 starting on our header row, and then removing one row down. We're going to count all the values where customers A in column A. So basically we're counting all those values to determine how many rows that encompass our data. As we add new clients or customers, we will automatically have that ability. Okay, and click close. Okay, so I just want to make a few changes. We're going with customer here, so I'm going to call this customer ID, right? Just so we have some consistency. And I also want to call this customer name, although it's customer name. Just wanted to make sure it's consistent. Customer name. Okay, so we have that. There we go. And again, I want to make a change. We're not really using customer IDs in this one, but I had it for. Okay, it's good. I like that customer IDs. All right. So what I want to do is I want to add some information here. The first thing what I want to do is I want to know what row this customer is on this list. Now you notice they start in row 3. That means Betty White is on row 3. Well, when I select Betty White here, I want to know what row Betty White is on. I want that 3 to show up here. So the first thing what I want to do is I want to know is customer row. That way, if somebody enters something other than what is already in the list, I want this to show empty. So how are we going to do that? Well, the best way to do that is to use a match formula and use if error around that. So let's go ahead and put view. We're going to need that formula bar in here. So I'm going to put equals if error, and then what I want to do is a match. I want to match, I'm going to look up this name, and I want to run a match based on that customer name. Okay, and I want an exact match, so we're going to put in 0. Now I want the row that it's located on. Our first row is row 3, so I'm going to add 2 to that. If it's found, it would return 1, but when we add 2, it's going to return 3. Now if there's an error, meaning it might not be found, I'm going to put in blank there. Okay, so that way 3 is found. Betty White is for 3, so I'm going to bring those, then I'm going to left justify this. If we decide to enter something other than that, right, that's not found, this is going to be blank. When it's blank and a user makes a change here, I'm going to let the user know, hey, this name doesn't exist. Would you like to add it? And if they get yes, then they're going to click a little icon here and they're going to be able to add it. Okay, so we know now the difference between a name that exists and one that doesn't exist. Okay, I also want to know what the row of the invoice is. Invoice row. I want to know, just like we do the customers, invoice row, just like we do with the customers, I want to know when they search for an invoice here, I want to know what row it is on, just like we did. So here in our invoice list, right here, I want to know that invoice ID number 1 is located on row 3. Now we've got some named ranges in our name manager, and it's called invoice ID here, invoice ID. So that is also an offset formula based on the invoice ID. So when I use the match formula here, I can determine what row is on, just like we did here. I'm going to match it based on whatever they're searching for here. Right? So that's one way, but what I want to do is, in this case, I want to know what row, whatever has been entered here, which row is the current invoice. When they search for it, we are going to find a different one. We're going to put that differently. So the invoice row is going to be a match based on this, what's inside right here in J1. And we're going to increase the font on that a little bit, so I want it a little bit bigger. Okay, so let's do that. Equals if error, and we're going to run a match. And that match is going to be based on this invoice number. We're going to use invoice ID for that. And we also want a 0, want an exact match. And again, I want to add in what row it's on. And I want to know, so the first row is on 3, therefore I'm adding 2. If it's not found, I just want to show blank here. So that's all I want here, just blank. Okay, good. So we know that invoice 1 is on row 3. If there's an invoice that isn't available, it's going to show blank. Okay, perfect. I want to do pretty much the same thing for the next one. I want to know if they're searching. So this is going to be for our invoice, whatever is located here. But when a user searches for it, I also need to know the row, because if it exists, I need to load it. So we're going to do something called search row here. Search row. And we're going to use the exact same formula here that we did here, except we're going to be using a different original cell, right? That cell that we're going to be using is not J1. We're not searching that lookup value in J1. We're now searching for it based on L1, right? That way, when they make a correct search for correct, we know what row it's on, right? Once we know what row it's on, we can simply place the ID right in here, and right inside here. We can just move this ID into J1. That's all we need to do to load it, and then we'll load it because we know the row. All right, so what else do we know? I need to know the next invoice number. As I create new invoice numbers, I need the unique invoice number for every single new invoice. So how do we get that? So we're going to put next invoice number, and we're going to use the max formula for that. But if there's no invoices that exist, it could create an error. So we're going to use equals if error again. In this case, we're going to use the max, and we're going to use the max based on the invoice ID, but I don't want the maximum, I want the next available. So we're adding 1 onto that. And if there's an error, I want the first available, which is going to be number 1, the first available invoice ID if there's an error. And that means since we already have one invoice here, we know the next one is going to be 2. Okay, so we've got that already. And the last one, I want to know the difference between invoice load and not. What does that mean? I want to know if this is going to be true or false. Now, the reason is when this invoice loads, right, we're going to be making a lot of changes. We're going to be making changes to the item ID, the technician, right? So when we make those changes, I want some things to load up. When I add an item here, I want that item information to load here. However, when the invoice loads, it's also going to be making a change here and loading information. So I really want to differentiate between those two types of changes. One change when the user actually adds the information manually. The other change is when we search for an invoice number and it all gets loaded in automatically. There's two types of change. So I want to differentiate between those two type changes, and that differentiation is going to be located directly inside B6. Okay, so that's all we need for now. Now we're ready to add some buttons, and then we're going to add some icons. So saving our work. We also want to add a really cool background to this. So why don't we do that? Page layout. I've created a background and we'll call it background here. And I've got this really cool background here that I found, and I'm just going to insert that. Now it's been sized accordingly so that it's going to end up directly on that. Because I've sized the lines, I've sized the background accordingly. So that's cool. And the reason it's showing up here and not here, because there's no background here, right? If I were to put in a background here like this, it wouldn't show up, right? So you'd see it's kind of differential. But because there's no background here, it shows up on the invoice, but it doesn't show up here. And that's kind of a nice effect. Great, so we've covered that so far. Now let's go ahead and add some buttons in. So I'm going to insert a shape, and we're going to use this rounded rectangle here. And I'm going to put it right here. We're going to add some buttons here. We're going to get the first one just the way we like it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to then, let's go ahead and add a style, like let's say this style, but I don't quite like that background. So I'm going to give it a shape background that's a little bit similar to our theme, which is this one here. We're going to call this save and then backslash update. So this button is going to be used both for saved and update. And then what I want to do is I want to center this here. So I'm going to do in the center here, and then I want to right justify it. Okay, that looks pretty good, but I want to add a little bit more onto that. We'll give it a width, and I want to give them all the same width. So let's say about 1.3 should be sufficient. And then what that's going to do is allow enough room for the icon. Okay, I like that. It might be a bit large. We can go slightly lower, 1.29. Okay, that's pretty good. So what we want to do is I'm going to duplicate that because so I'm going to use Control D. That's going to be for our new invoice. Then what we want to do is we want another one for our print invoice and another one for our save as PDF. So I'm going to move that last one up, and then I'm just going to hold Control, and then I'm going to click on all those, and I'm going to go into our shapes here, and then I'll just go ahead and line, and I want to distribute them vertically so they're all saved. Okay, so now we can rename them. So this one's going to be new invoice. This one we will have print invoice, and this one we are going to have save as PDF. Save as PDF. I like that, but I need one more button to add a customer. So I'm going to duplicate that. I'll bring that down here. Now we don't need any text on this, so I'm going to delete the text on that one. And I just want a square button, so I'm going to move it down here, and then we'll just change this to, let's say, 0.26, so it has both the same width and the same height. And now all I'm going to do is add a plus onto that, keep that simple. I want to make sure we don't print this, so I'm going to right-click and then format that shape. We'll go into the properties, and we don't want to print. We're going to unselect print, right? We don't want to see this button on the printed invoice. We just want it on the invoice for the user. Good, so I like that. That looks pretty good. We've got all of our buttons lined up. I'm just going to left justify that or center it and make sure that they're all lined up. Now they're lined up. Now we're ready to add some icons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert some pictures. And I've got some already saved up. So I'm going to click on these icons here. And then we're just going to select all of those and put insert. Okay, so we've got them all, but of course they're all sized accordingly. So I'm going to change the height to 0.2, and then I'm going to reduce them all down. So for this particular new invoice, this plus here, I want to add that here, but I also have a main one. So let's put this plus. This is going to be used twice. It's going to be used once for the customer, and I'm going to duplicate that, and we're going to use a smaller version for the new invoice. This is our little invoice icon. We can zoom in a little bit and take a look at that so we don't have to strain our eyes. And so we see our invoice here. So I'll use that for both save and update, that base icon. So I'm going to duplicate that using Control D, and then I'm going to place that right in here. So new. However, for the new invoice, what I'm going to use this icon right here, except that's a little bit big. So we'll go to 0.13 on that, and we can add that. So we've got our new invoice. Now our save, we're going to use this different icon, also smaller than it is. So we're going to put that right here, and I'll drop that down to 0.132 so that they're consistent. And we want to bring that above, so I'm going to bring that right on top. I want to bring it right here on top. So we've got save update. We're going to use that checkbox on the upper right corner. We've got the new invoice, in which we're going to also put that in the upper right corner. We have, let's see, we don't need this cancel, so we can get rid of that. We should add a delete. Maybe I'll be adding that on to for Patreon because I didn't add that. save as a PDF, we're going to put that right here, and print invoice, I'm going to be using that right here. So we've got print invoice. So now all we need to do is make sure they're centered here, and then I'm going to group them. I'm going to do the same thing for each one of these here, and I'm just going to group them, not center them because we have multiple icons in there. And the same thing for here, holding down the control, selecting all the shapes, and grouping them together. Same thing for the print, same thing for the PDF here. This one we can make sure it's aligned and group it. Okay, great. So we have it, and I'm going to do the same thing for this one. I'm going to use my selection tool. I want to make sure that both of these are centered here. So, oops, I did that. Okay, so they're both centered vertically and horizontally, and then group them. Now with all of those, using my selection tool, I want to make sure that I am not sizing them. I'm only moving them with the cell. So I'm going to do all of them, including this one here, zooming out here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right click here. Let's select those again. Actually, turn off the selection tool. Then we right click, format all the objects, go into the properties, move, but don't size with cells. That way, if we change our column width, it's not going to change those shapes. Okay, good. So I like that. It's looking really good. Now notice, keep in mind when you zoom in, the background changes, but at 100%, it's just perfect, and that's what we want. Okay, things are looking really good and really up. We've got all of it. We do need to add an icon here for our invoice, so I'm going to go into pictures, and we're going to open up. And I've got an icon right here for that, so we're going to insert that right here, this Fredder's Garage. This is the name. I've got to like that cool icon. And then what we're going to do is I'm just going to place that directly inside here. So we've got our icon here, make it a little bit bigger so we can see it. Moving this over, we'll move things over a little bit so we can give some space, and then the service invoice, we can bring this over a little bit here. Center that one, I'll center that one both directions here. All right, good. It's looking really good. We've got a really nice invoice. Okay, looking good. Our invoice is now really professional. We've got a good looking logo. We've got address. We've got information. We've got everything we need. I'm going to increase the font of these here. All of these, I want it a little bit above. Maybe we'll go with 12 on that so it stands out on a large invoice. Okay, good. I like that. It's looking really good. We're doing good. Now, all we need to do is start adding some information so that we can add in our items. And then once we add in items, we'll add in the totals and make sure this. Okay, so what do we have here? So what I really want to do is I want to be able to select an item based on an item ID in a drop-down list. And that item ID is going to be located here. So it is this. Now, I've already created a named range for that. So if we go into folders, we have a name manager, and we see something called item ID. So it is this item ID using offset. So we're going to use that. So inside the invoice, all we need to do for all of them right here, all the way up until here. In fact, let's just draw a line so we can differentiate. We know exactly how many rows that we're going to be using. Now, of course, there are ways to create additional rows. If you're asking me, you can create a floating footer. We did that in another training. Floating footer so that this footer floats, and that way you can create unlimited invoice rows. However, for this training, we're going to keep it relatively simple, and we're just going to go with a consistent number of rows here. So I want to add a data validation for this. Now, data validations here, this one we need to be strict on that data validation. We do want an error there. Now I want a list value. Now how do we know? What if we don't remember that? Well, we can use F3 to understand that, and we're going to click F3, and what we want is the item name here, clicking OK. So it is that data validation that we're going to select. So when I select something, I then want that item information to show up all the way over here. Okay, so that VBA is going to take care of that. However, what I really want to do is I want to be able to type in. If we have a large list of names, I want to be able to start typing in ENG and have that automatically come up, right? How do we do that? How do we get autocomplete in there? Well, the best way to do that is to have the same values in the column, perhaps below and out of sight, right? So we can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the items, and I'm just going to say, let's just go with A1000, okay? And then what I'm going to do is that's going to be our last, and I'm going to just then go all the way up, and I'm going to hold down the shift and copy that. So I'm going to right click, and I'm going to copy all those values. Now when I go into the invoice list, invoice here, I'm going to go down to our first available cell here, which is here, and I'm going to paste those links here. And now the links are pasted. And now, based on certain formattings and values, sometimes it will automatically come up. But if it doesn't, right? So let's take a look. Doesn't if it's two reasons, right? If we take a look at our values, we see we've got engine oil and we've got engine cleaning, right? So let's take a look at something like haircut. Nice. Haircut, that's nice for an engine. We should change that. Doesn't make sense for a garage. Let's take a look at tire change, okay? Tire change. So it doesn't come up, but what I want to do is I want to create a chain that's going to link this list with this value. So how can we do that? Well, it's got to be chain, and they can be non-adjacent cells. And what does that mean? Is cells filled with something other than empty. It could even be a blank. So we see that this has a value, this has a value. Let's put an X here. And let's take that X and we're going to bring it all the way down here to here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another X in here. And now you see that there's a chain, right? There's a chain that goes all the way up and here. It's now linked to that of filled cells. So now if I type in ENGO oil, so now we see that it comes up. Great, except I messed one thing up. What we want to do is we have IDs here. I had to add names, right? It is the item ID. Our item names are going to go here. So let's just update that data validation here, right? Not the name, but it is the ID. So equals, right? We can use F3 again. It is the ID, right? We have both of them. And I'll show you how those go in. So it's going to be the item ID. Let's add that in there. That's what I want. This is the item ID that we've copied down there. That's what I want. So let's go ahead and do that now. ENG, right? Oil, there it is there. That's what we want. We want those item IDs here. Break pads. Let's start typing those in. Break pad. Perfect. So now you see how it auto completes because we have a chain. Now it doesn't have to be X's. It could be anything. It could be a space. So even a double, two spaces or a single space, if I bring it down here, right, and I also add a space here, that well is going to work. So let's look at another one. BRK, right? That works also. So this is called autocomplete. Now we can do it as long as we have the chain, that chain of filled cells here, even with spaces. All right, great. So we have that, but what do I want to happen? Now, when I make a change here, I want that information. I want the item type to come in. I want if there's any date, we won't have that, but I want if it's an item, right? I want that item name to show up here. However, if it is a service, such as these service, I want that to come. Let's fix that one other thing. That one looked kind of weird, huh? Didn't it? Inside here, our items list, we have here, I wanted this haircut, won't help. Oil change, we'll call this oil change. And then let's call it standard, we'll call it standard oil change. Okay, good. I like that here. And then we'll call this standard. Didn't update my data. Break repair. Okay, good. So now we have some data in here for our garage. I don't think we're going to be doing a haircut inside our garage unless you have a barbershop and a garage at the same time, which is possible. Might be an idea. All right. So I want this information to autofill here, including the cost, including the total cost. But our totals, well, certainly those are going to be formulas. So we can do that. Let's add that in here. Okay, so let's write that formula, but we want to make sure both quantity and amount are already there. So equals if, it's going to be an and, right? We want two conditions, right? What is the conditions? Quantity should not equal empty, and also amount should not equal empty. So those are the two conditions, okay? If both of those are true, then only then do I want to multiply quantity times amount. Otherwise, show blank. And that's our formula. Okay, so that's all we need to do. So I'm just simply going to copy that, and then I'm going to bring it down to the last one. I'm going to paste special and then paste that formula. Okay, we want a very, very similar formula both inside our total cost. So we can just copy that and then make the appropriate updates. Of course, it is not this amount that we're going to be concerned about. It is this amount, the item cost. That is what we're going to go. So if the item cost and both the quantity quantity value, then do I want to determine the total cost. So this one, that way, if our quantity is 1, our amount is 50, and our item cost is 30, only then do we want to show that, okay? So, all right, great. So if that's going to be working, I'm going to copy that down here, that formula, and I'm going to paste that all the way down here. Paste those formulas down here. Now we've got our formulas, but we do want to format those. So we're going to use US currency for this training. So we will just copy those and then make sure that we've got the currency based on that. Formatting those as a currency here. Okay, good. I like that. That's looking good. I'm going to center this quantity down here, and then we've got it centered. All right, so it's looking good. We've got our formatting based on just the way we want it. We also want to know add in some data validations, but only if it is a service type. So let's get to that, and then we can move on. But now what we want to do is we want to make sure that at least we can get our subtotal in here, and then we're going to build out our taxes. Our subtotal is simply the total there. So we're going to use equals sum based on all of the values above in the total. That's it. So very, very simple on the subtotal. Taxes we'll be adding in just a moment. Okay, I'm going to format those here also to make sure that those are currencies. Continuing on, now what we want to do is we're just about ready for some VBA. We want to be able to add in those items. So let's do that. It's going to be based on a change. When a user makes a change to anywhere from C9 all the way to C31, we want something to happen. But we only want it to happen when the invoice is not loading, meaning when B6 is false. So that's when we want it to happen. So let's write some in. We're going to go into the developers and do some code writing now. So based in the developers, if you don't have the developers tab, you can find that right here into the options, right? And taking a look inside our customize ribbon, and we just want to make sure that the developer is selected here. You can also use Alt F11 as a shortcut to get you there inside Visual Basic. Now our Visual Basic is going to be directly onside the invoice. So this is our invoice sheet. This is where we're going to be writing our code. And it is going to be based on a change. We're actually making a change to the worksheet. So it's called a worksheet change. And that's what we're going to be focused on right now. So we take a look inside the worksheet here, we select, and then we're going to be based on the change. So it's a change event, not selection change. We're going to come to that in just a little bit later for our pop-up calendar. But so what we want to do is we want to, first of all, if the user makes a change to more than one cell, it's probably better if we exit the sub. So we're going to write some code. If the target dot count large is greater than 1, then exit sub. Keep in mind that we make a change for merge cells, but we try not to use those as much as possible. Okay, so we have that there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on a specific range if the user makes a change on a specific change. So what are we're going to call this on, let's see, item name, let's call it item ID change, okay? So if not, I'm using auto hotkey to automatically type that. So we're going to take a look. We're going to drop this down just a little bit, and we're going to bring this up just a little bit here. And we're going to focus on ranges C9 all the way to C31, C9 through C31. That's what we're going to focus on. So we're going to change this from C9 through C31. And I told you there's one more consideration we have to make sure. We do need to make sure that B6 is false and range B6 dot value equals false. Then we want to do something, okay? On item ID change, and then we're going to put it into parentheses, but not on invoice load. So when we run the macro to invoice load, this will go to true, and then it's going to go back to false. Okay. When we get to that macro, of course, I'm going to walk you through that step. So when we do make that change, when we're adding an invoice item, what we want to do is I want to make sure that there's two conditions. The one kind of change is when the user deletes it. If the user deletes it, that's a change, but in that case, I want to clear everything out. But there's another type of change if they add something. If they add something, that's another type of change. So what do I want to do? Well, then I want to determine, I want to look up that item. I want to find what row it's located here, and then I want to add in the type. I want to add in the name, the description, the default quantity, the cost, and the price. I want to add all that information in. So how do we do that? Well, the best way to do that is simply to, I should probably change cost and price around. I'm going to reverse these just a bit, because what I'd like to do is the price, the sales price is first on our invoice, and then comes our cost, right? So you see what I mean here? I want to make sure that our price is first, right? Our amount, same thing, and our cost is second. So we reverse it and make things a little bit easier. Okay, so saving our work. So now what we want to do is we want to add that information, but first we need to determine, one, what type of change the user. Has the user deleted it, or has the user added a field? So if range C and the target dot row dot value does not equal empty, then do something. Okay, else let's say user deleted item clear row. Okay, so here we're going to clear the row. Here we're going to determine what row that item is located on. So the first thing what we want to do is we want to determine that item row. So we're going to dimension the item row as long. Now what we want to do is we want to do on error resume next, right? And the reason is because when we look for that row, it could create an error. So we're going to wrap it in on error go to 0. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So the item row is equal to items, right? That's the sheet, making sure we have IntelliSense. Items, the sheet name, range. Now what are we looking up? We're looking at the item ID. That is a named range already. And we're going to find it, right? I'm looking for it. What am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for the target value. That's the value that the user just made changes. And we don't need to look in and look after and look in where we're going to look in Excel values and then Excel whole. Okay, and then what do I want to extract that? I want to extract the row, right? I want to look for that row. Item, let's call this item row if found. If found, it should be found. It's a drop-down list of found. Okay, so that way if it's found, how do we know if it's found or not? Item row will not be 0. That's how we know if it's found. So what we can do, the first thing what I want to do is I want to remove some validation here. Now take a look at this, right? This is either going to be for our technician name. We have technician's name right here. It's going to be for that, or it's going to be for our item name. So there's if it's a service, right? If it's a service type, it's going to be a technician. I want to put in that technician name. If it's not, then I want to do it. But if it's a technician, it's going to be a drop-down list of all the technicians. Otherwise, it's simply going to be the item name. So what I want to do is if there's any validation here, I want to delete it, right? So in column F, the first thing I want to do is delete it. And that means because anytime we add a new data validation, right? Data validation, if I add a data validation here and I use a list here, and if it's a source, let's say we use employee name or technician name, I think it's what it is. So what we want to do is add that in here. So here is this, but we're going to do tech name here. Click OK. And so sometimes if it's a service, I want to be able to choose the technician who did that. But to do that, we want to make sure to delete it. So anytime we decide we might add a validation, we always must first delete any validation that could be there. So to do that, we need to delete the validation inside the cell. So that's the first thing what we're going to do. So first thing we'll do is we'll do range F and the target dot row dot validation dot delete. Okay, put delete any validation if exists. Okay. All right, good. So we've deleted that just in case it exists. Now what we want to do is I want to determine if the item row does not equal 0. So if the item row does not equal 0, that means that we know that that item was found. Then do something, right? The item row does not equal 0, then do something. So what is it that we want to do? Well, the first thing what I want to do is I want to put in that item type. Where's that item type, right? I want to put that item type directly in D. And where is it going to be found? It's going to be found directly inside C. So all we need to do is add that in there. So how do we do that? Well, we write just a little bit of code to do that inside here. So let's do this range. We're still on the invoice sheet, and we're going to be putting it directly inside D. So let's do that. D and the item row, we know it's not in, or let's put it in the target row, target dot row dot value equals, okay? And it's going to come directly from C in the item row. So we're putting that directly inside D, putting it directly there inside column D, that item type. So all we have to do is say equals items dot range C and the item row dot value. And this is going to be the item type. So now that we have the item type, sorry, it's coming from B there, right? B is our item type. Our item ID is in A. Our item type is in B. And C, of course, is the next one. Okay, so now that we have the item type, I'm just simply going to copy this so that we can make things a little bit quicker. So we've got in D. Now what is going to go inside here? Of course, nothing is going to go in the date yet. User will put that in. What about F, right? F is a bit different, right? If we have an item, if that item is an item type, remember we have two different types of items. We have service, in which we want to put in a technician, and we have item. So if it's item, I want to put in that item name here, okay? So here's what we're going to do. So inside the invoice, we're going to use an if statement. If it's an item, then put that item name directly in F. All right, so let's add that inside here. So it's going to use an if. All right, if here, if range D and the target row dot value equals item, then what do we want to do? Then we're going to add in that item type. So we're going to say E, of course, we're putting that directly inside F here, F. So we're adding that in right there. So F is going to be equal to whatever is located in C, and that is the item name, C in the item name. So the item name is going to go directly inside F, and it's coming from C. All right, so then we can do end if. But what if it's not? What if it's a service? Well, if it's a service, we want to add in that validation. So else service, right? This, of course, this is an item. This is called an item type. And this is the service type. So service type, we want to do something a little bit different. First thing what I want to do is I want to clear out anything that might be an F. So range F and the target dot row dot clear contents, just clearing everything out. Now I want to add in that validation. So range F and the target dot row dot validation, right? I want to add in a validation here. So how do we do that? So validation dot add, and I want to add in the validation. I want to Excel. It's going to be a list type validation. So we're going to put in list, and I also want to add a stop on that. So XL valid. So it's going to be valid. We have alert stop, right? We want to stop if it's not existing. And then XL between, right? We want to between those values. And then we want to give it a name, a formula. What is that formula? It's going to be equal to the name of the technician. So it's going to be equals tech and then underscore name, which is the same as our named range, technician. And that's it. So that's all we have to do. So let's take a look at that and see how that works, saving our work. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add in here our engine oil. Okay, so we add this is correct, right? Engine oil. So now let's add a service item. This oil change is a service item. Check to make sure that our drop down list. Let's do that one more time. Let's do it one more time. There's no validation here, which is just what I want. Changing this to tire change, which is a service, right? Now we have a drop down list of employees. That's exactly what I want. Okay, very, very cool. So we also want to continue. If it's an item, regardless, I want to add in the description here. The description gets added in regardless. So let's go ahead and add in column G. So let's continue on adding in throughout our invoice. So in column G, what do we want to add in? Well, then let's bring this up here, bring it up here more. So we've just focused this area on the item type. So now we need to continue with our continues. So we're going to add in, let's copy this and focus on G. G is going to take on our description. So I'm going to paste that in here and we're going to change this to G, and it's going to come from our item description. Now our item description is also located inside here in column D. So we need to add that inside our invoice. In column D, we'll be updating that. So D is our description here and the item description. So great. So we have that. What else do we need here? I also want to add in my default quantity. So we're going to put that in item default quantity. Now quantity is going to go directly in column H, but it's going to come from our items. Now where's our items located? Here our default quantity is going to be located in column E. So I want that to come to column E. So we'll update the code there and it's going to come directly inside column E from our item list. Once we have our default quantity, I want to know the sales price. So the sales price. So our sales price is going to paste that in here. It's going to come directly from column F and it's going to go directly into column I. So from F going into I. So we just made those updates, right? Going into column I and it's coming from column F. All right, and that is our item price, right? The sales price, item sales price. We also want to know the cost of that, right? I want to know what is the cost of that. But I want to make sure that the cost, now this is where it gets a little bit tricky, right? The cost here, what I have here is a cost of the item cost, but if it's a labor, I want to know the labor cost. Now our labor cost, we're going to get into in just a moment. It's going to come directly from here, our labor cost, right? So if it's a service item, I want to be focused on our labor cost because our labor cost could be different per employee, right? Because our labor is different. So our individual employee costs are different. Therefore, our labor costs are different per employee. So our costs are associated only if it's a service item. So if it's a service item, we're going to pull the cost from here. If it's a regular inventory item or part that we're selling, the cost is going to come directly from here, our item cost right here in column G. So that's what we have to do. We just have to determine that, and it's going to be based on that type. So how do we do that? Well, we've already differentiated it. We've already got an if statement here, right? If the item type is an item, if it's an item type, do something here. So if it's a service, do something here. So we can add, we've already got the if there. So let's add that in right here because we know here it's an item type. So we can bring in the cost using this if statement here. So under this if statement, I'm going to take the item cost in column K and bring it directly from our items located in G. So that's what we're going to do right here. So I'm just simply going to copy this here. And I'm going to paste this down here and we're going to rename this called item cost. Item cost. So that, of course, is going to come directly from G. So we're going to put that right in here from G here. And where's it going inside? Where's it going inside our invoice? It's going directly inside column K. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to update that into column K right here. So our item cost coming from our item sheet from column G into column K. What about our service? Well, service is a little bit different, right? Our service is only when we add a tech name, right? So that's going to have to be a different change event because we don't know, only when we make a change to the technician name, only then do we determine the cost. So we're going to hold off on that until we make a change event on column F other than empties, right? So as long as we made a change, so that's going to come a little bit later. So now if I double click this, right, now we've got the description, now we've got the default quantity, now we've got the amount, and now we've got the item cost, right? For a service, right, if it's a service here, double clicking that, we've got that, but we don't have the cost, which is correct. We don't want the cost just yet because the costs are associated based on this. So now that we're focused on that, let's go ahead and take a look inside that, and we can focus on the cost if it's a technician. All right, what I'd like to go into is to determine exactly how we calculate the actual hourly cost of those employees. So when we go into the technicians, we've got several fields. We've got a billing rate, how much we're going to be charging for. We have an annual salary, right? Go ahead and what is the salary? How much salary are they getting annually? We have how many taxes and insurance they're paying annually. What kind of benefits they're getting, total benefits. This could include fuel reimbursement, health insurance, or bonuses or whatever. We have how many hours they're paying annually. How many paid hours are we getting? So if we're working 40 hours a week at 52 weeks, we're going to get a total of 2,080 annual paid hours. Now I also want to know how many of those hours are they not working but we're paying for. If you give 1 week vacation and 1 week sick, that's a total of 80 hours that are paid but they're not worked, right? But what I want to do is I want to take all of this information here. I want to determine the actual hourly cost. And we can do that with a simple formula. What we're going to do is we're going to determine the total sum of the annual benefits, the taxes, and so on. We're going to sum all of that up. Then what I want to do is I want to determine how many hours they actually worked, right? How many hours they actually worked, right? So if I subtract 80 paid time off hours from 20, we get the 2,000 hours that they actually worked, right? If we know how many hours they've worked and we know what a total costs us, all we do is need to make a simple division, and that's going to determine our actual hourly cost. Now, I've created a full application called the Labor Burden Calculator, and of course, this is available. Of course, I'll include the links down below, and this is something that I've been selling for quite a while. And we're able to add employees. You'll be able to break down whether it's an hourly or salary cost, whether we have work week hours, how many work weeks, whether we're paying overtime, total paid time off, total benefits. It determines, and all this will calculate the actual time off, the actual direct labor costs, your burden costs. So that's called the Labor Burden Calculator. You can Google search that or check the links below. That's available. That's something that I've had available and selling for a long time. That is not a free application, but you're welcome to purchase that for a very low price. Okay, so that's the Labor Burden Calculator. That's how I came up with it. But basically, this is just a summary of how we can get to that. So that's our actual hourly cost. This is what we want to do, right? This is what we want to do. So if we're going to be having a technician, we want to understand how much we're billing, right? We could bill at this rate and we could charge at this rate. We know if we want to the actual hourly cost. So it is this cost that I want to go inside the invoice, and it is that billing rate that I also want to update, right? If I want to update that, I want to know what the billing rate is. So if it's a service, I'm going to update this amount to the hours that we're billing based on that employees, and I want to update the cost based on the cost of that technician, but that's based on the change of F, and of course only when the invoice is not loading and when there's an actual value. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to base it on a worksheet change on column F. So that's what we're going to go into now, worksheet change. Okay, but before we do that, why don't we just finish this up, this change, and that basically means if the user has deleted it. So I do want to finish that up. Let's finish that up before we make a change. And the other ones, we're going to clear out the row if they've deleted it. So the user deleted the item, we're going to clear the row. So the first thing what we want to do is I want to clear everything from D, right, all the way over to let's just say, but not the formulas, and I'll also clear out K, right? So I want to clear out everything. Then I also want to determine if there's a database row and delete that database row. So first thing what we're going to do is clear out the information here. So let's write that up right now. So range D, let's do that D, and the target row, and what else? We're also going to clear it all the way out through I and the target row. Dot clear contents. Clearing those contents. Clear out item details. Also, I want to clear out K, that cost. So range K and the target dot row dot clear contents. Okay, clearing it out. Clearing. This is the cost. Clear out item cost. So once we've cleared that out, I want to determine does B contain a value? Is there a database? Has this row been assigned to the database? So we can determine that, but only if B contains a value. So if range B and the target dot row dot value does not equal empty, then do something, right? Then there's the database. Let's put this database row exists. So first of all, I want to dimension that. So we're going to dimension database. Let's call this item database row. Item database row as long. And actually, let's call it invoice. It's really an invoice item database row, kind of a longer one though. Invoice item database row is equal to basically whatever's in B. So we just need to copy this. We know it's going to be whatever's in B here. So this is it. So now all we need to do is delete that. So with our invoice items, that's our sheet that contains it, range, and our invoice items, not the quotes on that because it's a variable, invoice item database row, and I need to dimension that, and invoice item database row dot entire row dot delete. So delete database row. Okay, in case there's one been attached. And that's it. So invoice item database row, checking the variables, those look okay. All right, also then what I want to do is just clear out B, right? Once we've done that, once we've cleared out the database, we can clear out B. So I'm going to paste that in here and then just start to clear contents. Okay, so clear out database row here. So, all right, so once that's good. All right, so now we've cleared it all out. That's all we have to do. And we just cleared this up. Okay, very good. And if this is if it's empty, and if. So we've got the 3 and ifs, we are good to go. Okay, great. So what else do we need to do? Now what we can do is we can write the one if there's been an employee change, right? On change of technician, update the hourly cost. And probably I want to update the hourly rate. I want to change the amount to whatever we're billing based on that. And I want to change the cost based on that, but that's only on change of F, right? So if we make that change, so that's what we're going to focus on right now. So let's do that. So let's write an on change of technician, update or change hourly billing rate and cost, not on invoice load. That's important. So we're focused on F, right? Column F is where we're going to make those changes. And it's going to be based on F9 through F31. So that we know that. And remember, range, we need to make sure B6 must equal false, right? Dot value equals false. That's for the invoice load. If invoice load, it's going to go to true. So we want to make sure that it is false for sure. And we also want to make sure that F contains a value and range. F, we want to make sure there's actual name and the target dot row dot value does not equal empty. Those are the conditions. Then don't forget the then. Those are conditions. That's what we want to make sure of. Once we know that, then we can add in those information. All right, so let's go ahead and add in the details. We need to make sure that we are actually finding that technician, right? I want to make sure that it actually exists because I need to pull information from the technicians table. I need to pull the billing rate. I need to pull the cost. So we need to determine the row. So we're going to dimension the tech row as long. Okay, and again, on error zoom next, just in case there's an error. When we're finding that, an on error go to 0. So what is that tech row? That tech row is equal to, we're going to call it text, that's the sheet name, range. And what is that range? We have a name range called tech name, tech underscore name. And then also we have where's it found? We're going to find. Dot find, we're looking for something. What are we looking for? We're looking for the target value. That is whatever the user just changed it, target value. And I'm going to use Excel values and Excel whole. Now I want to extract that row. Okay, so what is that row? Okay, so now we need to determine if the row has been found, right? If it hasn't been found, it could create an error. So we just need to run a test. If the tech row does not equal 0, then it's been found. Then it's been found. Okay, so what do we want to do then? I want to add the billing rate and I want to add the hourly cost. The billing rate is going to go directly inside I. That billing rate will come directly in I. That also that item cost will go in K. So it's going to come directly from here. Billing rate from E, cost in K. So let's go ahead and add that in right now inside there. So range, and then I will take on the cost and the target row. Dot value is going to be equal to what? Text dot range, right? It's coming from the technicians, and it's calling from E. That's the billing rate. And what is the row? The row is tech row. It's the row it's been found on. Dot value, and that is the billing rate. And now all we need to do is just not rage. Could be a rage if the rate's too high. Okay, copy this down here, paste it down here. Now what we want to do is we want to focus on K. This is the cost, that calculated hourly cost, and that's going to go directly inside column K. This is our calculated hourly cost of that employee. Good, so we've got that. We're going to test that out, and then we'll make sure it's been found. And then let's just copy this and clear that out. We don't need that. Okay, saving our work always before running VBA. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pick that service item. Now what I want to do is who's changing? Fred's changing that oil. Fred's amount rate is 100. His cost is 29. Let's double check that, right? Fred, his cost is 100. 29.61 is his hourly cost. Perfect, right? So that's what we want. So we know how much Fred's billing at, and we know how much Fred's costing us. We're making good money on Fred. He works for cheap. He works for lunch. Okay, so Fred's going to change our oil, and we know we've got, all right, good. I like that. That's looking pretty good. Why don't we add in, we can add in a date. We got a selection change. I want to put in a pop-up calendar. Now I've done a pop-up calendar you've seen in previous. Now it comes with this. This is the pop-up calendar. It comes with this sheet. And I have put this, I've also done a revamp on this. So if you've seen that before, we can now change the months and we can change the dates and change the years easily. So I've done a bit of a revamp on the code as well. It's probably not perfect yet, but it's getting better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that entire shape and calendar. I'm going to paste it directly inside here. Now what we want to do is we want this calendar to appear on a selection change event. When a user makes a selection change, probably could be here as well, a selection change anywhere from E9 through E31, then we want this calendar to pop up. Anything else and we want it to disappear. So let's make some selection change code events because that's when we want it to appear. So we'll take a look at that. All right, so inside our code, back inside our code, we're going to write some focus on some selection change. So I'm going to click on here, and then we're going to go into selection change here. This is where we're going to write that code. Okay, first of all, if I'm going to write some target.countLarge is greater than 1, this helps prevent bugs, then exit sub. That means if a user makes a change to more than one cell, selecting more than one cell, then we're just simply going to exit the sub. Okay, so now that we have that, now what I want to do is I want to check to make sure that the calendar exists, right? If that calendar doesn't exist, we need to add some code. So we're going to put check to make sure calendar exists. If not, copy from calendar pop-up. Right, so what we want to do basically, if for some reason this gets deleted, this generally what we do is we hide it automatically, right? So I'm going to right click and I'm going to hide that sheet. Generally you want to hide this sheet, but we can still copy this backup calendar since it's shaped. We can copy it directly inside here. So that's what we're going to do. I've already got some code written on that. We don't need to get into code as far as that's concerned, but I'll just give you an idea. So first of all, we're going to dimension the calendar as a shape. And also what I want to do is the time, the calendar is a shape, that's sufficient. And now what we want to do is we're going to set the calendar as a shape, but it could create an error if it doesn't exist. So again, on error, resume next. Okay. Now we're going to set the calendar equal to shapes calendar. Okay. So that's the name of the shape, calendar. That's the name of that shape. Now what we can, again, wrap it on error, go to 0 here, just in case. Now what we're going to do is we're going to run a test just like we did on that row. If the calendar is nothing, since this is a shape, then what I want to do is I want to run a macro called replace calendar. And all that pretty much is a macro that's located in our pop-up calendar module here. And it's just going to replace that calendar somewhere around here. Right here, it's going to be a calendar. All we're going to do is copy it from the calendar pop-up shape, paste it into the active sheet. That's all we have to do there. Great. So that's all we're doing there. It's relatively simple. So we're just going to do that. Calendar's nothing, then replace calendar. Run macro to replace calendar. So now what we want to do, so now we're good to go there. So now what we want to do is if the user makes a change, if not intersection, makes a selection change anywhere from E9 through E31, and we can probably add on the date here located in J3, probably add that on too. That's our invoice date, so why not add that to J3? If any one of those cells, then we want that calendar up here, right? They make a change. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're running the macro that's going to show that calendar. But we do want to make a check to make sure. I want to run some macros then through colon there. Okay, so what we want to do now is I want to run a macro I want to check the pop-up. So basically we're going to check for sheet and calendar. First, the macro is simply going to check for the sheet. It's called check for sheet. I want to make sure that that pop-up calendar sheet exists. Check for sheet. That's a macro to check for sheet. That's our calendar. If not, create. Okay, so that's all it does is it creates that sheet if not, right? It's macro. Then all we want to do is run a macro called calendar show. That's the calendar show. That's all we need to do. It's relatively simple. And then if it doesn't exist, else in case, I want to make sure that we're hiding the calendar, check for sheet just in case, and then calendar hide. Calendar hide is not just going to hide the shape, but what it's going to do is going to automatically hide it and it's going to clear out. So now when we select a date, now it automatically appears, okay? So we're not going to get too much into this. It's already going to be a long training, but basically that's how we do it. Now we can also click on here and it'll show up here. Okay, good. So I like that. That was looking pretty good. And we got the pop-up calendar working. All right, so we can put in the date in now. We can put in a technician for those service type items. We can have those appear here. And we can also enter quantities and everything's looking really good as far as our invoice. What I want to be able to do is I want to be able to save that invoice. Before we do that, might as well get to these totals here. I want to know the total sales of services. Of course, that's going to be based on whether it is a service item or not. So we're going to use sum if for that. And we're simply going to sum all of those invoice totals based on the type of that. So we can use sum if for that. All right, so let's take a look inside here. Equals sum if, and we're summing it up for what is the range? Well, the range is going to be this item type. So we're going to go all the way down with that. And we're only basing it on those that contain our service, right? So service, I only want to look at that. So, and then of course our sum range is our sales, right? So our sales is our total sales here. So I want to know the total sales based on that service. Okay, so that's all we knew. That's our sum range. So it's going to total all of our services. Notice we have two service items for 200 and 100, and we have one item for 20. So that's just one. I also want to know the item sales. What is the item sales? So I'm just going to copy that and go down here. But this time, instead of service, I want to base it on item, right? So I want to know those items. Okay, so it's $20, right? But what is the cost of those services, right? So again, I can paste that in here, but this time I'm not focused on the total sales, I'm focused on the total cost. So I'm gonna bring it right over here. And we see that it's 91.38. 91.38, which is the combination of these two items here. And also what I want to know is the item cost here. So again, pasting that in here, just changing this both to item, and then we're going to update the total based on the cost. Now we know we've got $10 in costs here. So entering that, we've got the 10. And now I want to know the total profit. Of course, the total profit is all of our sales. So it's going to be equal to sum, right, of our sales minus the cost, minus the sum of the sales, minus, another way to do it, the sum of our costs, which is these two here. So that is our total here. So we've got 218 as our total profit. Of course, these are amounts, so we're going to change those formats to amounts just as we want here. And we've got all of our information here. So we've got 300 in sales, 20 in items, our service costs are 91, 10, our total profit's 218. I like that. That's looking really good. Let's continue on. I need to add a status in here, and I also want to add total sales. So we're going to do that here. Let's scroll over a little bit here. We're going to add some information in here. So inside, let's say, because I also want to add some tax information too, and I want to know that. So we also want the total sales, the total cost, and the net profit here. So it's going to be pretty simple here. I'm going to put that starting in, let's say, P3. So I'm going to put in here, we need that for that little graph we saw, that little bar graph that I'm going to show you. So I'm going to put in total sales. I want to put in total costs, and I want to put in net profit. All right, so I'm just going to put some borders around here. This is just going to help us for the graph itself. So I'm going to put in some borders around there. Now, of course, our total sales are simply equal to the sum. It's just equal whatever we have. We know that our total sales here is just what our invoice amount is, so we can just put in the invoice amount. It's going to be relatively simple. We know that the sales are going to be our total down here. I'll put it in down here, our total. And then our total costs are going to be the same thing, equals the sum of all of the costs here. So we're going to put in the sum of all of those costs here. Those are our total costs, both service and item. And our net profits is simply the summary down there, equals this, our total sales here minus our total cost here. Of course, we don't have any of the sales in yet because we have to do the tax column. So it's going to be, of course, that's in Q4. So Q4, we'll go ahead and put that in. So it's Q3 minus Q4. So now all we need to do is add in that tax and add in that total here. So I'm going to put some tax information here. We need some invoicing details here. So we'll start it off in S, and we're just going to put something like invoicing details. And then what do I want to have in here? Are we going to charge sales tax or not? Charge sales tax. I want to know if we're going to be charging that, and that could be yes or no. And then what I want to know is, what is the default sales tax? What is that rate, right? Default tax rate. And then I also want to know, what is the default status? Default status. For new invoices, what is that default status? And we're going to put some statuses down here. So we'll call it invoice status. And then we're going to have a list of invoices. Let's just say open, unpaid, and maybe we want to have billed, partial paid, and maybe have fully paid. All right, so we can just give these a little bit. Let's put those, it's relatively something simple here, keep that easy. And then we'll just make this bold, and I'll put some borders around all the way around, let's say here. Here, some borders, drop this down a little bit while we're doing some formatting. And we're going to open this up so they're user entered. So I'm going to color that light or white is fine. And here what I want to have is invoice status here. So invoice status. So gonna make it, I wanted to make it bold here. Now, okay, so we have our, and what I want to do is I want to create a named range called invoice status. So I'm going to highlight that, and we're going to call it status. So insert, or actually formulas, name manager, here, new, we're going to call it status. And it's going to use an offset formula because I want a dynamic, so offset. I always like to use the header as a point, so it's this header. And then one row down, count A, we're going to count everything including the header because that will help us if there's an issue. And then we're going to subtract 1 because we want to exclude that header. One column over. So tabbing that, we want those dancing ants around all that. Click OK. All right, I also want to do whether we're charging sales tax or not. So I'm going to create a new one, and we're going to call this tax option. Okay, and it's going to be tied to this cell here, right here, and click OK. And I also want to know the tax rate. So I'm going to click a new one, and I want to call this tax rate. And it's going to be based on this cell here, default tax rate here, and click OK. And I also want to know that default status. What is that default status going to be here? It's going to be all of our status. So I'm going to go in data validation here, and we're just going to go list, and we're going to equal to equals status. And that means for every new invoice, what status do they get? So we're going to call this is called open. So we have a default stack. This is going to be a data validation called yes or no. Data validation, list, and we're going to use yes, comma, no. Just capitalize it, yes, comma, no. So we're either charging sales tax or we're not. So click on yes. And then what is that default rate? Let's say it's 5%. Okay, so we can do 0.05 and then format it as a percentage, which is what I want to do. And so now what we can do is we can use that inside. So here's our 5%, and we can add there. Okay, so let's do 5%. Okay, that's sufficient. We'll left justify it just to make sure it's equal. Okay, so we have our tax status. Again, this is user entered, so we'll bring that a little bit lighter on that. I like that. Borders around here. Okay, get some consistency in there. All right, so now we've pretty much set everything up here. We've got our invoicing details here, and I like the looks of that. All right, good to go on this one. Let's color this a little bit darker here. This one should be sufficient. Okay, so now that we have our details, we have our total sales. Let's go ahead and add in our tax details here. So I want to know the tax rate. I only want to show this if their tax option is yes. So we're going to change this. Equals if tax option equals yes, then what do I want to show? Then I want to show the tax, and I want to show the tax rate. So what is that tax rate? So, and I want to show the tax rate and tax rate. And what else do I want to show? But I'm to format that tax rate, and I'll show you why in a second. And then there we go. Okay, so let's do the end parentheses here. Okay, good. I like that. And so the tax, obviously I don't want 0.05, I want to show that rate. So we're going to format that tax rate, and we can use the text to do that. And then all we want to do is we can add in that format. What is that format? Well, I can use something like, let's say 0.0 and then the percentage. That should be sufficient. There we go. Okay, so I like that. Let's take a look at that. That looks good. All we need is probably maybe a space between that. right here. And that's it. So now we're showing the tax and it becomes dynamic. Therefore, if we change the tax, if we don't show that, right, if it isn't, then what do I want to show? Well, otherwise, that's if it's yes, then do this. But what if it is no? If it's no, then just show empty. Okay, that should be sufficient. So now when we change that tax rate to no here, then all of a sudden we see that it's just empty. And that's what I want to have, empty. But I want to show that tax rate if it is not. So going back in here, changing that back to yes, now I want to add that tax to the subtotal. So here again, we're going to use equals if tax option equals yes, then I want to simply add it in that in. So it is going to be our tax rate times our subtotal here. Otherwise, empty. There. Okay, so that, and now all we need to do is sum equals the sum of our subtotal and our tax rate here. That's it. Okay, good. So I like that. All right, so now we're showing 336. If we change it to 10%, it's automatic, or 8%, right? Or let's say do 0.08. That's going to be 8%. I'm going to actually add some additional. Let's do that. There we go. That's what I want to see. And now we see, okay, good. So I like that. Again, I'm going to do that. One more zero on this. I want to show one more zero. Okay, I like that. 0.08%. It shows that in case we're having a very small tax, I meant to do 0.8%, but that's sufficient. 8%, not tax. I wish taxes were that low. I wish they were. All right, so that looks good. So 0.8% or 5% sufficient enough for our purposes. That looks good. Now we don't need 2 columns over. All right, I like that there. Again, back to there. No need for that extra. Good enough. All right, so 8%, we'll keep it at that, but I like that. That gives us a nice additional amount that we can do, and then we can add in. So we'll keep that a relatively simple. All right, we'll just update to something standard so we can know. Let's go do 10%. That should be fine. Okay, so we've got a 10% tax and looking really good. That's what I want to show. All right, continuing on. So we've got the tax updated. We now have our totals updated. Now all we need to do is just save it. So now we've got our total sales, our total costs, and our net profit. Everything's looking really good here, and this is going to help us for our graph. We're going to use that right in here. Let's go ahead and get these buttons operational. All we need to do is just save the invoice, new invoice, and then load the invoice. All right, so let's go inside because everything's on the screen is looking really, really good. We're all set up on that part. So inside our VBA code, we're going to focus on that invoice module. So invoice macros here. And all we need to do is just a few macros in here, and then we're going to be done. The first thing what I want to do is I've added some just basic macro functions here. So we're going to save and update, save message. I want to create a fade out, save message. That'll be pretty cool. And what I want to do is just save it. So the first one is we're going to focus on that saved message. So how are we going to do that? Well, this one we're going to just add in. First of all, I want to make sure that we've added in a customer. If they decide they're going to save that invoice, I want to make sure that we have at least a customer name. Now, if we have a customer name, I also want to add in the address and a few other things. But let's go ahead and save this customer name. We want to make sure that G5 contains a value. So how do we do that? So with invoice, I want to make sure we got the sheet right, making sure that G5 contains a value. If .range G5.value equals empty, then let the user know. Message box, please make sure to add a customer. Please make sure to add a customer before saving invoice. Okay, good enough. Exit the sub because there's nothing we can do. Assuming that they have a customer, now what we need to do is determine new invoice or existing invoice. It is the same macro that will save both. So how do we know whether it is an existing or a brand new one? Well, we can determine the invoice row. If this is blank, right? Let's say this is invoice number 5. It hasn't been saved, or 8, whatever. We know B3 is going to be blank because that invoice does not exist yet. So it is B3 that's going to tell us whether it is a new or not. So we can use that. If .range B3.value equals empty, then it's a new invoice. Else it's an existing invoice. Else, and then end if. And this would be existing invoice. Great. So now that we have that written up, what we can do is we can determine the invoice row. So the invoice row, it's a whole long variable, equals invoice list, that's our invoice sheet, .range A9999, .end, XL up, .row. Okay. +1, right? Adding 1 for that first available row. So once we have that, what do we want to put in there? Well, I want to put, of course, that new invoice ID, but where's that invoice number coming from? Well, that invoice number is going to come directly from that B5, which is our next available, right? B5 is our next available. So I want to make sure that that's in J1. It should be on ANU. And I also want to make sure that this one is also in our first column here, located here inside A. So we're going to do both of those things. So range, let's do dot range J1, that's where our invoice number, dot value equals dot range B5. B5 is where our next invoice number. Okay, also what I want to do is I want to make sure that A and our invoice list contains that value as well. So A here, we can copy this here and put that down right here. And of course, the invoice row dot value is going to be equal to whatever is located in B5 right here. That is also our next invoice number. So we can just copy all of that and place that directly right in here. So that's going to go. Okay, so once we have that, that's all we need to do. What if it's an existing invoice? Existing invoice, all we need to do is extract the row directly from B3. That row is always going to be here. So we just need to extract that here. So the invoice row is equal to B3, invoice row. Now everything else, regardless if it is new or existing, we're simply going to be copying it over. So let's go ahead and copy. We can copy all of this here and just add the information in here. So make those updates. So A, of course, we've done already, but B, what is located in column B of that invoice list? Well, that is our date, then our customer, then our status, then our total. So we need to bring in those 4 values over. And of course, they need to come directly from cells here. So we have date here, we have status here. Let's add a data validation while I'm thinking about that. Data validation list based on our status, okay, equals status. So now that we have that, so we can add our status in there. All right, so we want to bring all that over in from here. So we can just copy that inside in the code, bring it in. So B, of course, is our date. So let's add that in here. And then we'll update the cells on side. So I'm just going to copy this. And we're going to add that in date. We have our customer next, our status next, and lastly, our invoice total. Of course, this is going to be C, this will be D, and this will be E for the last one. And our date is going to come directly from, let's bring this down a little bit more here so we can see all of it, and we can bring this up too. Our date's going to come directly from I3, so we're going to place that right inside here, I3. Our customer is G5, so we can update that. Status is J4, and lastly, our invoice total is going to be all the way at the bottom. Here's our status here in J4. And invoice date, we want to make sure that's J3. And lastly, our total is located here in J34. So we're going to update those, J34. I think our date was wrong here. That should be J3, not I3, right? Okay, J3. J3 is our date. So, all right, I think we've got it all. We're good to go. We've saved everything. But now, once we saved all the main information, we also need to save what's in the rows. I need to make sure to save all of this. So that's what we're going to do. We're now going to save that item information. So we'll add a little more space here, bringing it down. And now what we're going to call is add or update, right? Because we're both update invoice items. Okay, so the first thing what we want to do is I want to determine the last item row. Last item row on the invoice is going to be equal to dot range. The last possible we'll put as C31 because we're going to loop through those. C31 dot not dot value but dot end XL up dot end XL up dot row. Last invoice row. This case, of course, it is we're using C, right? It's 12. So for the last one, this one's 12. Oh, we forgot to, let's test that out to make sure that when we delete that, okay, it looks good. That's what I wanted. Deleting it, we didn't test it out, but it looks really good. Okay, so in this case, the last one's 11. So what I want to do is I want to loop from 9 to 11, adding all those, using C as the last row. So once we get that last row, I want to make sure that we actually have items, right? So to do that, we need to just run a check. If, let's bring that up a little bit. I don't want that all the way over. Checking to make sure it's less than 9. If the last item row is less than 9, then we have no items. Less than 9, then go to no items. And we need to go all the way down here and just go no items so that we can skip everything we're doing in case there's no items at all. Maybe they want to just save the invoice temporarily. All right, so assuming that we do have items, we can now run our loop. For the item row is equal to 9 to the last item row. and then next item row. So here's our loop as we loop through each of the items. The first thing what I want to do is I want to know, has this item been saved in the database row? Here's where it's located in B. If there's a number here, we know it's been previously saved. That would be this particular item, invoice items, that this particular database row, right? These items for invoice number 1 have already been saved. Here's the rows. Here's the row numbers, so we know. So if there's a row, we know to update it and not add a new one. If it's new, we'll add a new one at the first available row on this list. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to check B right now to see if that's available for us. All right, so moving on, as we know. So we're going to check if dot range B and the item row dot value equals empty, or let's put in does not equal empty, then it's previously been saved. Then let's do else. Okay, so now here N, if it's not empty, then database row exists. We know it exists, so we just need to extract that inside. We'll call it invoice item row. It's equal to dot range B in the item row. So it's going to be simply the B and the item row, the same one, and the item row. Okay, so those call this invoice item database row. Let's put the label on that. Invoice item database row. Okay, so that's all we need to do. But what if it doesn't exist? New database item row. If it doesn't exist, we need to get it. So the invoice item row is going to be the first available. So it's going to be this invoice items dot range. We'll use A. And what's the first available? 999 dot end. XL up dot row plus 1, first available row. So now we have that, the first available row, what I want to do, I want to add in the first thing, but only for new items. I want to add in that invoice ID. That invoice ID is going to come directly from J1. So we need to add that in inside column A. So I'm just going to copy that here. And then down here, I'm just going to paste that here. And we'll call it and the invoice item row dot value is equal to whatever's in J1. J1 is our invoice ID. We'll put, this is only for new ones, invoice ID. Also, what I want to do is I want to add in the row, whatever row is associated with that. And that row is going to go directly inside. I want to put in B, right? So B is going to take on that row, that invoice item row. I'm going to put that directly in B. So that's the second thing we want to do. So here we can just copy this because this is exactly where we're going to place it. Copy that down here. And what's going to go there? Well, it's going to go equal to that invoice item row. Add database row. Now that we have that, I also want to add in one more thing only for new items, right? And that new items is going to be located here in K. I want to know the row that's associated in column K, and this is going to use a formula. And that way, if we delete a row, it always stays the same. So inside K, we're going to add that formula. So I'm going to simply copy this here, and then I'm going to update it to column K, pasting that in here, updating it to column K, and I'm going to add in that formula equals, then we're going to put in the equal sign and then row. Okay, that's going to add that formula, add row formula. All right, once we have that, that's good. That's all we need to do for the new items. Everything else that we're going to do is for both new and existing items. So we just want to copy that information here. So again, all I want to do is simply take whatever information is in here, including, right, all the item ID, the item name, the date, the type, adding everything in here up to the total and bringing it directly inside this invoice item, starting in the item, so from B all the way to H, B through H, we're going to keep that in here. So let's add that in right now. So invoice items dot range B and the invoice item row and colon, right, all the way through what? All the way through H and the invoice item row dot value is equal to what? Equal to dot range. We're bringing it over. Where's it coming from? It's coming directly from here, C all the way through I. So equals C through I. C and the item row and through, again, we're going to put it in through I and the item row dot value. Bring over item values. That's not all. We still have to add in the cost, right? We had to skip something, right? So now what we want to do is we can add in both the item cost and we can add and update the invoice. So now that item cost, this item cost, I also want to save. I want to save that directly inside here, the column I. So I is going to take that on. So invoice, let's say we can just copy this part of it and update it to I a little bit faster, slightly, but not much. So I is going to take on what? It's going to take on that dot value here, adding that in. Dot value is equal to dot range here, that item cost, right? Item cost is coming directly into from K. So K and the item row. Item row. Okay, make sure there's a space between that. And that is our item cost, right? So we want to save that to the database, item cost. And lastly, what I want to do is I want to put what row of the invoice, and I'm going to put that on J. So J is going to take on that. And this is not IB, it is I. Glad I caught that. Okay, so we've got I all the way to I covered. Now all we have to do is just simply add in J. So J here is going to take on that item row equals item row. That's the invoice row. So that's what that is, that invoice row. So, all right, that's it. We're going to do that for every single item as we loop through all the items. And we can get rid of that. That's it. That's all we have to do. Now what I'd like to do is add a little fade out message. Once the invoice is saved, I want to add a little bit of a fade out message. So to do that, I'm going to add a shape, right? Inside here in this invoice, I'm going to add a shape and bring it, let's say, down right about here. We don't have too much space. So we don't have too much space up here. So I want to add that. So I'm going to create a shape, just a basic shape here, and then we can just call it, it's going to be off the screen, so let's just call this invoice saved. Something very small, but just enough so that the user can see it. And then we'll give it a unique color, something like this here, and then let's just center everything here, and we'll go into the home, we'll center it here, and then one more on the up. Okay, good. I like that. So we're going to give it a specific name. I'm going to call it invoice saved message. I'm going to give it, so here, instead of rounded rectangle, invoice saved message. So we've given the shape a name. Now we want this to appear. I'll just keep it up here for now so you can see it. So I want this to appear only when it's saved, and then I want it to fade out. Okay, so I'm going to create a macro for that. And this macro is going to be called here invoice saved message. Now we could put the macro directly here, but sometimes we use it in multiple. So I like to have it separate. So I'm just going to paste it right here. So run invoice fade out message. And that macro we're going to write here. So that's it for that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to write the macro here that's going to save that message. So what do we need to do? We're just going to focus pretty much on one specific shape. So with invoice.shape, that invoice saved message, it's going to call invoice saved message. That is the same name of the shape we got. Now we're going to focus directly on that. So first of all, we're going to dimension the I as long. It's just for the integer there. And then we'll call it delay as double. We want to run a delay as double. And also I want to do the start time. We might need that start time as double. So now what we're going to do is first of all, I want to make it visible. Dot visible equals MSO true, making that completely visible. Now for I equals 1 to 1, let's say 150, right? We're going to run a loop, closing our loop, next I. Okay, inside that loop, what do I want to do? Well, first of all, I want to set that fill transparency is going to be equal to I divided by 150, that same number, okay? So we're going to set that fill so it starts to depend, as I changes, so does that transparency. We're going to create a delay. That delay is going to be equal to, let's do 0.009, okay, like less than a second as we add that delay. We're going to set that start timer is going to be equal to the timer. And now what we're just going to do, and then do events. We'll do events. So as we run that loop, we want everything to happen while we're doing it. We don't want it to stop, right? So do events is going to allow other things to happen while this macro is running. So what do we want to do? Well, I want to loop while. Why do I want to loop? I want to loop while the timer is equal to the less than the delay. So loop while timer minus the start time is less than the delay. So, as long as we're less than the delay, we can continue going on. Delay. Okay, so that's next slide. So that's all we have to do inside our loop. Okay, let's take a look at that. And we're going to copy that. Okay, we're good to go on that. It's just a simple little macro that we're going to use to run that fade out message. I'm going to save our work. I'm going to run that macro to see if we have any issues on this particular fade out message. Okay, and we should see it's fading out. Okay, look. All right. Okay, good. The last thing what I want to do is just to make sure that visible equals false. So one more thing, right? Notice it's a little bit. So lastly, outside of the loop, dot visible equals MSO false. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now we're good to go on that. Running that one more time, making sure it's completely hidden. And we're looking good. Now it's gone. That's exactly what I want. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to save this invoice. So I'm going to get rid of the one right here. And what I want to do is I want to assign a brand new one, right? So because there's no invoice row, we know it's going to assign. So I'm going to right click that. I'm going to assign that macro. And we're going to do invoice save and update. This one right here, and click OK. Saving our work. Now what we're going to do is going to check for any issues inside the code. And we're going to click save and update. And we're going to set last item. This particular one equals, right? Obviously we need to do equals. Forgot that. Okay, continuing on. Let's do this. Fix this. B and the value does not equal then. Item row does not equal a for item row. Okay, so we need to should be last item row, right? So we have to set the item row to last item row. That last item row should be obviously 1, right? Or 9 actually. We're starting at 9, not 0, and that doesn't make sense. Item rows go from 9. Continuing on. Okay, let's just restart that macro. Continuing on, looks good. Saved out messages going. Let's take a look inside our invoice list. We have invoice number 2. That looks good. Our invoice items, we have 3 items. That looks good. They're here. Row number. Let's double check that. Format those. Those should not be just numericals, which is fine. General. Making sure they're all general. Okay, that looks good. I like the way that that looks. We look like we're saving. We've saved the invoice already. Let's check for a row. We now have an invoice row assigned to that. We now have an invoice number assigned to that. Now what I want to do, a few things. If I make a change to the customer, I want that customer address to appear here. So that's going to be on Worksheet Change, a change based on G5. So let's get that written up right now. Well, that's going to be, of course, back inside our Worksheet Change event. So it's going to click on here, and we're going to go back up on the Worksheet Change. That's what we want to focus on. So let's drop that down here, and we're going to go on customer name change. So the first thing is going to be based on G5. So that's where our customer name is located. So G5, if the user makes a change for G5, and also I want to make sure that G5 contains a value, right? It can't be empty. Nothing and range G5 dot value does not equal empty. Only then do we want to focus on that. Then do what? Then we want to look for that customer, okay? So we want to remember, if we remember correctly, B2 is going to tell us if the customer exists or not, right? So that's what we want to know. So B2, if B2 is empty, we know the customer doesn't exist in the list. But if it does, so we can make some determination based on that. If range B2 dot value does not equal empty, then customer exists. So let's just put in here customer exists, else customer not found. So what if it does exist? If this, I want to determine the customer dimension, the customer, actually we can dimension it up here because we're going to need that dimension, the customer row as long. That should be sufficient. And so the customer row is going to be equal. Customer row is simply equal to whatever's in B2. So B2 is going to determine our customer row. And what I want to do is I want to load in that customer address. So here, what do we want to put inside G6? The line below, I want to place in the customer address. That customer address is going to come directly from column C in the customer list. So we can bring that over. So range B6 dot value is equal to customers dot range C and the customer row dot value. This is the customer address. The second line I want to put in what? I want to put in multiple things. I want to add in the city, the state, and the zip code in this third line. All 3 of those inside the third line. And I'm going to put them directly, of course, inside G7. So let's add that in now. Range, this should be G6, not B6. Range G7 dot value is equal to, again, we can copy this. I'm going to put that in. So inside there, customers, inside D, right? D, of course, is going to be our customer, right? City there, right? Going to put it in right here, customer. I want that city in D, E, and then F. So E and F. So we're going to add that in. So and, right? What else? Let's do an underscore, do the next line. And placing that in customer. This time it's going to be E, adding that E onto it. Adding E here, right? Capital E here, lowercase e here, copying that, and lastly we want F. So then just going to put and underscore, And then next we're going to do F. Okay, so that's going to put in there, but of course I want to probably put in a comma to separate that. So I'm going to put in that comma, let's say after, but I also want to put some spaces in there, right? We don't want to put them all together. So let's do that in there. So we're going to add in a space here and, right, we want to add that in city, and then maybe we'll space in a comma. So here and, right, let's go ahead and add the and we need an and sign here as well, and the space, and then we'll do it here. So another and then a space, comma, space, and then and. Okay, so good. So that's what we're going to do. So we've got E and F underscore. Let's go ahead and we got too many and signs. We don't need this one here, and we don't need this one here because I added them to the line below. That's sufficient. Okay, I like that. That's looking pretty good. Saving our work. So that's going to be based on the customer change. So let's take a look and see how that looks inside the invoice. When I double click Betty White, and then we're going to add that in here. Dot range. We don't need the dot because we're focused on the sheet here. So that was just oversight. Taking a look here. All right, that looks pretty good. I like that. Mobile, Alabama. Let's go ahead and check another one. That looks pretty good. That's just the way I want. So anytime. Now keep in mind that on this type of change event, regardless if the invoice is loading or not, I want that address to show up. So that's regardless of B6 is true or false. Okay, looking pretty good. So what if it's not? What if I type in a brand new one as we saw in our sample originally, and I want to do what I want to do if it's not, I want to clear out anything that might be in G6 or 7, and I want to give the user the opportunity to add one. Okay, so that's what we're going to do inside here. So else the customer not found. So in that case, I want to clear out G6 and G7. So range G6, comma G7 dot clear contents, clear address. And I also want to give the user the option. Now what I want to do is ask the user, do you want to add this customer, right? Giving them a nice option. So if message box, let's do this customer does not exist, would you like to add them? Okay, and then what we want to do is VB yes or no, customer not found, that's going to be the title, equals VB yes. Then what do we want to do? Then do a few things, okay? So I want to add a customer, right? So I've got this little form here. Let's take a look at this form. This add new form is a cool form. I just created this. So it was a little bit easier. This is called field 1. This is called field 2, field 3, 4, and so on and so forth, okay? So for each customer, I've got a brand new field. I've got a save button here called save and a cancel button here. And I want to add a background to this form, and I want it similar to that. So let's go ahead and add that. Click on the form, and we see that we have a picture here, picture alignment. So we've got no picture here, but I'm going to add one. Now I've created one already. Let's go ahead and I've got a background picture here. We can see it here, this background picture. I'm going to click open, and that's going to give it a nice background picture just as we have. Okay, so we've got this form. So what I want to do is I want to launch this form, and I want to put whatever name inside field 1. See, field 1 is the customer name. So whatever they've filled in already inside G5, I want to put directly inside field 1. So that's what we're going to do now. So if they say yes, what do I want to do? So with that form, I'm going to focus on just that form, add customer form dot field 1, right? That's our name. Dot value is equal to whatever is in range G5. That's the name dot value. Okay, customer name. Okay, also what I want to do is I want to launch that form. I want to display that form. Add customer form dot show. Good. Okay, so I like that. So now what happens if I type in Fretters, which doesn't exist? It's the cleared out. Do you want to add this form? Click yes. Now Fretters appears with the first name. Now they can add it. So now what we'll do is we need to add code to save this. So how are we going to do that? So we just want to add some code to save it. Okay, so when I save it, what do I want to do? I want to create a brand new row here, a brand new customer ID. I want to save whatever information they filled out in that form onto this list. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. Now, I also want a brand new macro attached to this. This will also launch the form. So that's relatively simple. And now I have another macro I started to create. Let's do that right now. Invoice macros, which is the next one, customer add new. So with this is going to be attached to that button. All we're going to do is simply show that form inside that. I want to clear anything else out, but that might be in the form, and then load it. So what we're going to do is we're going to, with this particular form, the first thing we're going to do, just 2 lines in this macro, and all we're going to be doing is unload the form. So clear anything else out. So unload. And then what do we want to do? I want to form that add customer form. So what that's going to do is simply clear all the fields out from that form. And now all I want to do is add customer form dot show. It's the same thing we did. Now this macro is going to be tied to that new button that we created up here. This button right here. So we right click, we assign the macro, and we paste that in. Click OK. Now we click on that and we see we've got that brand new button, so we can add that up. Now what I want to do is I want to assign a macro, one to this save and one to this cancel. Where are we going to put that? Well, I'll put that directly inside the code of that form. And so how do we do that? We can right click this form and we click view code. And this is where we're going to write it. So there's 2 buttons on this, right? We have one that's called a cancel button, one that's called a save button, right? And I have both of those here. So if we look down here, we have one called, let's do cancel first instead of appear at the top. Cancel, what do I want to do? Well, that's relatively simple. All we need to do is just simply hide the form. So all we need to do for this button, and we click this, is just add customer form dot hide. Just hide the button, right? That's pretty easy. What about the save? Well, the save is just a bit different. Obviously, we need to save the fields, but we can make it a lot easier. So the save button, when that is clicked, that click event, right? Click event is what we're going to be focused on. What do I want to do? So now what I want to do is I want to dimension the customer field as a control, right? I want to save all of those fields to the first available row for the customer. So we're going to dimension here the customer field. Here we'll call it field as a control. Okay, so that's because that's going to allow us to loop through all of those fields as we dimension. So I also want to dimension the customer row, right? Customer row as long, and also the customer column. We're going to be looping through the column, so we need those both as long. So what I want to do is I want to see if I want to make sure that there's actually a name. We can't save it if there's no even customer name. So if ME, that's the form, field 1 is our field, our first customer name field. Our first field is specifically named field 1 for a reason. Dot value equals empty. Then we need to let the user know. Then message box, please make sure to save a customer name before saving. Good. And then in this case, exit sub, right? Cannot save a customer if we don't actually have a customer name. Assuming that we do have a customer name, we can then move on. So we're going to focus primarily on that customer sheet. So with customers, that's the sheet, making sure that we have IntelliSense pop up. And of course, with this customer sheet, I want to determine the customer row. The customer row is going to be the first available row. And that first available row is going to be the first available row. So we're going to use n to xlot plus 1. First available row. Once I have that customer row, what I want to do is I want to get the customer ID. Now here's another way. Now remember, if we're looking for the next invoice ID, we use the max formula here. We can do something very similar inside VBA to do that, but this time we want a customer ID. So we want that unique customer ID. So what is it? So we're going to set that up. So dot range, A is where we're going to put that, A and the customer row. That's where our ID is going to be there. And so it's going to equal, we're going to use the max formula, equals application worksheet function. We're going to use the max formula, and that max is going to be dot range, okay, customer ID. We're going to use customer ID. We already have that as the named range, customer ID. And then what we want to do, of course, it's going to be plus 1, right? I want to use the max of this plus 1. Remember, I don't want just the max. But what if there's an error? If it doesn't exist, we need to wrap that in on air resume next. Why? If there's no values, let's say there's no customers, it'll create an error because there's nothing here. So if there's an error, we need to know about it. So we can check that. We can run a check. So then we can do on error go to 0. Okay, now I just want to check to see if it contains a value. If I want to check if this is empty, that means there was an error, right? If equals empty, then I just want a value equals 1, setting that original set first to 1, right? First customer ID to 1. There would be an error if there's no data already, no customers. So we just want to set that first 1 to 1. That is exactly the same thing as we do inside here, right? We're doing the same thing here. If there's an error, set it to 1, right? Oh, excuse me, on the ID here. If there's an error, set it to 1. That's exactly the same thing, except we're doing it in VBA this time. Okay, so now we've set the ID. We're good to go. So now we need to set the rest of the remaining fields. And how many fields are there? Well, let's take a look inside the customers. We've already taken care of the ID. So we're going to start it off in column 2. We're going to go all the way to the last column. That last column is column 8. So I'm going to run a loop from 2 to 8, and that's why it's so important to use our customer column. So for customer column equals 2 to 8, and next customer column. So all we need to do is simply add in our fields. So we're going to set the customer field. We've already created it up here. Customer field. We've already set it up here as a control. Is going to be equal to ME, right? That's the form, dot controls. And then what is it going to be? Dot field. They all start with field. And we know what? Customer column, that was good. Customer column, right? -1. Why is that? Because our customer column started 2, but our field started 1. So the customer column -1. Okay, so that's going to set that customer field. Now all we need to do is map the data. So this is basically map data using forms. So dot cells, we know we're already inside the customers. Here, customer row, customer column, dot value is equal to what? Customer field here, dot value. That's it. That's all we need to do to save that customer information. And then of course, we just need to hide that customer form. Once we're completed the loop, once we're out of the loop, we can then hide that form. So add customer form dot hide. We could also use ME as well. That would be sort of in there. Okay, and that's it. And then also what I want to do is I want to set that default, right? That name here inside, that first name inside, the name that we created, that customer name, put it in G5. So we'll use invoice, calling out that sheet because we're inside something else. We're in invoice dot range G5 dot value equals field 1 dot value. Okay, good. So I like that. That's going to set the customer name. Set customer name. Okay, let's give it a try. I'm going to save our work and we're going to give it a try. So we're going to go into the invoice, click on here, cancel this, make sure that closes. That works good. Adding a name, let's just call it Fred Fretters, and we'll give it an address. That's enough fields for now. And then Main Street. Okay, good. So let's save that work. It's already tied to that button. It's automatically added. I like that. It's automatically added the name. That's all we added. Perfect. And our customer ID is generated. All right, that looks really good. Now we've got the ability to add brand new customers and save that information. All right, I like that. That's looking really good. What else do we need to do? Well, now what I want to do is when I enter an invoice number in here, I want that invoice to load automatically. When we search for an invoice, I want it to load. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do that, with, of course, with the change, right? And a work order. So it's going to be a change event. When we make a change to L1, that's when we want it to happen. While we're already inside the code here, it is going to be a change event based on L1. So this was a customer name change. So we can get rid of that, clear out the spaces. And this is going to be based on invoice search change. So let's write it down here. On invoice search number change. And it's going to be based on our search of L1. So L1 is what we're going to focus on. We also want to make sure that L1 is not empty. L1 is nothing. And, right, range L1 dot value does not equal empty. Then we're going to search for it. Then does not equal empty. Then do something. Okay, so now that we have that, what are we going to do? Well, the first thing what I want to do is I want to check our search. Remember, we have a search. If we type in a sheet that doesn't make any changes, we know that that search row is going to be empty, but we have to let the user know if B4 is empty, they have entered an incorrect invoice, right? If we do a correct one, we know B4 is going to have a value. So we're going to look to B4 to see if it's an accurate invoice or not. So that's the first thing we are going to check. So if, let's do this, range B4 dot value equals empty, then do something. Message box, let these know. Please make sure to enter a correct invoice number. Okay, exit the sub, right? It's incorrect. Exit the sub. Okay, assuming that they have done it, then we can continue on. So what I want to do is if I know that this is a correct invoice, all I want to do is put this directly inside J1. So take whatever's in L1 and put it in J1, and then clear out whatever's in L1. So we're going to do that. So range J1 dot value equals range L1 dot value. Okay, add invoice number, and then clear out whatever's in L1. So range L1 dot clear contents. We don't need that anymore. We've already moved it over. Okay, so then all we want to do is simply run the macro that's going to load it. So that is the macro that's going to be, that we're writing right here. It's going to be called invoice load. So I'm going to copy this here. We're going to write invoice new, and then we're going to write invoice load. So I'm going to copy this. There's nothing in it yet. And I'm going to bring this right here in invoice. And I'm just going to paste this here. Run macro to load invoice. Okay, so now that we've got that up, saving our work frequently, which is always a good idea. Now we're going to do two things. We're going to write invoice new, which is important. That's relatively easy because all we need to do in that is just simply clear out a few fields, and then we're good to go on that. So let's go ahead and write that invoice new now, and then we'll add the rest of them. So invoice new is going to be just this with invoice. And what do I want to clear out? First of all, I want to make sure that let's set B6 to load to true, because there's going to be change range, because there's changes that we don't want. B6 dot value equals true. Okay, set invoice load to true. Okay, so also when we set it true, I want to make sure to set it back to false before the macro ends. So I'm going to copy that and then equals false. Okay, set invoice load to false. Okay, inside here we just want to clear a bunch of cells to make sure. So the first thing what I want to do is I want to clear all the cells out. So dot range, and then I want to clear out, let's do dot clear contents, and then what particular cells? Well, obviously all the invoice numbers. So we're going to do J1. I want to do G of the customer addresses, G5 through G7. I want to do all the items and information, so B9 all the way through, let's do 9 through, in this case probably I31, and then also I want to do the cost, which is in column K, so K9 through K31. Okay, so I like that. So G5 through G7, B9 through I31, that should be 31 here. And then all of a sudden K, the cost associated there. So we've got all that cleared out. I also want to automatically set the new invoice number. So I want to take the next invoice number and I want to place it directly inside J1. So we can do that here. So dot range J1 dot value is equal to dot range B5. That's going to set up next invoice number B5. Set next invoice number. Okay, so now the next invoice set, I want to set the current date. I just want to set dot range J3, setting the current date to the current J3 equals, and this, let's put date, set current date. Okay, and we just need to assign that macro to the button. That's all we need to do with this macro. So invoice new, we just copy this if we want, or we can select it from the list of macros. Either one will work just fine. Bringing it down here, this new invoice, right, along with the buttons, assign the macro, pasting that in there, clicking OK. Now we do new invoice, automatically everything's cleared out. That next invoice number, probably should do this too. That's going to be cleared out on search, so don't worry about that. Okay, great. So now we've got our new invoice. Everything's ready. We're ready to add in some new items information. We're ready to add it. Now what I want to do is, again, I want to build that load, right? Everything's looking good. And we can add in the technician. And all right, I like that. That's looking really good. And we can add dates, of course, in there if we want to. All right, so our invoice is loading up. Now let's load. Now when I enter 1 here, I want that old invoice to load. We're going to write the macro for that right now called invoice load. We're already ready for that. And it's a relatively simple macro. So let's go ahead and write it up. We'll add in, we'll determine the first invoice row. So with invoice load, the first thing what we want to do, obviously we need to make sure, right, that B3, when we add that one in here, right, we need to make sure that B3 contains a value. That invoice row must exist. So that's the first thing we're going to check with invoice. If dot range B3 dot value equals empty, then let the user know to make sure they select the right invoice. Message box, please enter a correct invoice number. Okay, exit sub. Okay, nothing we can do if we don't have it correct. So now we do have it. What I want to do is I want to make sure that we put that inside a variable. So the invoice row is going to be equal to whatever's in B3. Range B3 dot value. That's going to set that invoice row. invoice row. Once we have that, I want to make sure that we're clearing out all the contents, right? I want to clear it out. So we've used that here. I just want to make sure everything gets cleared out. So I'm going to copy this here. And I'm going to paste that directly inside here. So clearing out the contents, everything else. Also, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I don't want to clear out L1, making sure that L1's not cleared out. That's important. And then J1, I'm not going to clear out J1 either. Also, J1, of course, our invoice, that's already been transferred over, so we don't want to do that, but everything else is correct. Okay, so once we have that, what I want to do is I want to add in the information. So J3 is going to take on the date and so on and so forth. So dot range J3, I'm going to add that data, J3 dot value equals dot. So it's going to come directly from the invoice sheet equals invoice list dot range, and it's going to come directly from column B. That's the second column inside there. We want column B and of course the invoice row dot value. This is our invoice date. Okay, so all I need to do is just copy this, and then we're going to make some updates on that. So I'm going to copy this here. And we're going to paste it again, right? We want column C is going to be the customer, and we want D, of course, is going to be the status. So this is going to be the invoice status. And then also we've got, let's say, that's good. That's good. We got date, status. Okay, so invoice, this is going to be the customer. So BC, and then D is going to take on that. All right, that was good. Of course, the customer is going to go directly inside G5, right? That's going to trigger the address and the city and state to automatically load up. Our status is going to go directly inside J4, and that looks pretty good. Okay, so that's going to cover it. And now that's going to cover it. So that we've added in the invoice date, we've added the status here, and we've added the customer located in G5. Now what we want to do is we want to add all of the items, right? So the first thing what we want to do is we want to set B6 to true, loading the invoice, and then we're going to set it back to false here. And so we're going to do that inside the code here. We've already written it up here, so we can just copy this. And then we can paste that right in here, and then going to the end, and then I'm just going to go the invoice load to false, making sure that we do that at the end as well. Okay, so from between those two, we're going to load all of the items in here. Okay, so the best way to load those items is to use an advanced filter. I want to know all of the items that are associated with that specific invoice, and that means all the items located here. So what I want to do is I want to run an advanced filter, and I want the results. I want to know all of those items that are associated with invoice ID 1. And I'm using a criteria, and this criteria is going to be based on whatever is located in J1. So our criteria is already set. I want those results to come here inside here, and then I'm going to bring those results over. Okay, so that's with an advanced filter. The first thing we need to do is determine the last row. If you cover my videos, we cover this almost every week because they're so powerful. So we're going to do this. The last row is going to be equal to, so let's focus on the invoice items. So we're going to do with invoice items. Okay, that's the sheet that I want to focus on here. Invoice, let's type that in, right? Items. Okay, so that's the sheet I want to focus on. So this last row is going to be inside the invoice items here. I want to know the last row. If the last row is less than 3, then we can exit the sub. Or actually, we can just go to no items. So we don't want to go. Then go to no items. So we're going to put no items right down here, right? No items. Okay. And so now we can skip. We certainly got to set B6 back to false. So load. So that's important. Okay, assuming that we do have items, we can run a loop. But we're going to run that advanced filter and get those results before we do that. So we're going to do the advanced filter. So once we add that advanced filter, that's auto hotkey, that's making things a lot faster for me. And so what we're going to do is we're going to run that. Now it's going to be based on this. So we're going to go all the way from A2 all the way through K, and our criteria is M2 through M3. So it's going to be A2 through K. We're going to run that advanced filter. Our criteria is going to be M2 through M3, M2 through M3. We want that the results of that filter to come into where? Into this set of area here, all the way from P2 through Y2. So that's where our results are going to come. P2, let's reset that. P2 through Y2. Now what we want to do is we want to determine the last results row. The last results row is going to be based on column P. Column P is our last results row. If those last results row are less than 3, then also there's no items. So last results row less than 3, then exit the sub. In fact, this time let's change that to go to no items. The same thing here. All right, so assuming that we do have items in our results, then what I want to do is actually bring over all of those items. So we can do that with a loop, right? So the last results row for the result row is equal to 3, of course, starting it to the last result row. Closing our loop, next result row. Okay, so bringing that information in. Once we want to bring it in, I want to set that invoice row. What row? We need to know where on that invoice we're going to place it. That invoice row is critical. 9, 10, 11, and 12 coincides with the invoice rows right here. 9, 10, 11, and 12. So we need to know what row we're placing it directly on the invoice. So that's going to come from column Y. So we need to grab that. So we're going to put that inside a variable. So that variable is going to be invoice item row is equal to dot range Y and the result row. So that's going to get invoice row. So let's get an invoice row. So once we have that, we can then bring over the variables. So we can do this. So the invoice, we need to call out that sheet dot range B, that's our first one, and the invoice item row and colon here, and all the way through I, right? That's the sales item. Let's capitalize that, make sure. And, right, the invoice item row dot value is equal to where? It's coming from our results, all the way from P, because we want to bring in the row here, and it's got to come, that database row is critical because that's going to go directly inside B, right? That's going to go in B. So we want to make sure we bring it all the way over from P. So we're going to do that inside the code right here. So P and the results row, and the P3, that's our first one, right? Through our last one, through all the way through W and the last result row. That's going to do P and the result row all the way through and all the way through W and the result row dot value. Okay, so that's going to bring over all the details except for the cost. Item details, and cost is going to go in column K. So in column K, we're going to do this. So here, invoice dot range K and the invoice item row dot value is equal to invoice items dot range X. Here's X, right? We want to bring in that X and the result row and the result row dot value, right? Because our cost is coming from X, right? If we take a look inside our invoice items list, we see our cost is coming from X. We've already extracted this value. Our cost is the last thing, and that's going to come directly inside column K. All right, so let's just take a quick look at those last two lines. Invoice range B through I in the invoice item row equals range P and the result row through W in the result row. Item details, and let's just call this item cost. Okay, so we've brought in over everything, and that's going to go everything. So that's just going to loop through every single row in the results. Okay, removing this here. We don't need the extra spaces here, cleaning things up a little bit. No items, this is fine. We're going to go. And lastly, we want to make sure that we've set this to false, and that's it. So we're going to save our work, okay? Make sure before we, right? Now when I go ahead and load, add in one, let's see if there's any errors. So we're function not defined, next result row, that's fine, no G needed there. Continuing on, okay, let's take a look here. All right, take a look. We have the data, but we don't have any data inside here. Taking a look inside the invoice items here, we know we've got data. We probably got the last results row incorrect, so let's skip those. Let's take a quick look at that. Our last results row is equal to P, right? Making sure that we have that. If the last result row, yeah, just here, just the last results row. I need to update that result row. Okay, so the result row is coming from, this is not column AA, right? We want to make sure there's A, and this should be last row here. So there we go. Last row here, just update that. Automation, last row of the data, right? The last row is less than 3. Then our last row is coming to our advanced filter. This is our last results row. This is the last results row. Okay, so let's take a look here. Run that one more time. And now we've got our data to load up. We've got our database rows here, which is correct. That's the way I like it. And then what we're going to do, we've got our costs in here. So it loaded up exactly as it. Quantity, of course, is not a numerical, not. So we could just bring this down, set that up to, it's not a currency, of course, it's just numerical. And sometime you may want to do, yeah, I like number there, and I'm just going to center that. Okay, that looks good. All right, that's the way I like it. It's looking very, very nice. Now we've got it to load up. So now we can easily search. Let's add in another one. searching it. All right, it looks very, very good. All right, so now all we need to do is we need to print and save it as a PDF. I'll probably be adding delete and as well as any of your ideas inside Patreon. Print, save as invoice, and then we'll just make that little chart. That's pretty quick. Okay, let's get into the last two macros super quick, which is of course print, which is very, very easy. We're going to base that on that, of course, is a single line of code. Invoice dot print out. Of course, we can set the print out. And then what do we want to do? So we're going to do from copies preview active printer true. Print a file, print a file name, ignore print area is false. Of course, we want to keep those print file. We want to keep that print area. And all we need to do is for the print is just highlight here, that's set. And then what we want to do is we got a fixed print area. So we're going to do that. And we're going to go to the page layout and we're going to print area and we're going to set that print area. Okay. Now all we need to do is just right click that entire button to print invoice and then assign the macro to that entire button here. So here, right click, assign that macro. And then of course, invoice print, click here. And then it's now going to print that entire invoice. Let's take a look at that. It's going to go to my default printer, which is Snagit. And that looks pretty good. Okay, good. I like that. That's set up pretty good. Let's bring that down here so we can see it. Okay, I like that. That's nice. It looks good. Okay, so the print is worked. Now what I want to do is I want to save it as a PDF. That's going to be this last macro that we'll write. It's also a very, very quick macro. So we're going to go ahead and write that right now. So continuing on. All right, when we save a PDF, we need to find a file path for that. So we're going to mention the file path as a string for that. And then as a string, what we're going to do is we're going to set that invoice. First of all, I want to make sure that we're going to save the invoice before we create it. So invoice and then save update. That's going to run the macro save before we, of course, save it to PDF, save invoice. That's just in case they didn't save it, So that's always helpful. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to set that file path where that PDF is going to be saved. We're going to set the file path equal to, now we don't know an individual person's file path on their computer, but what we'll do is we can use wherever that workbook is located to create a file path. So we can do that. This workbook dot path, so the path of the workbook, and right, I want to create a backslash on that. So backslash. And I want to set a specific name for that. I want to do a unique name. And of course, the invoice dollar range. I want to get that customer name. Where is that located? In G5. I want to put that as the file name. Dot value. And I also want to put the invoice number. And, right, let's do and. I want to do underscore. So there's a separation between the invoice number and the customer name. And I want to put J1 invoice dot range. J1. That, of course, is the invoice number. That's going to be our file path. The only thing I want to do is if that exists already, I want to make sure that it's deleted in case that exact name exists. So if we can use directory, in this case file path.vb directory, we'll use does not equal empty. If that means if it exists already, then all we need to do is kill it. Kill the file path. So we're just going to delete it if it exists. Okay, so once we've done that, all we need to do now is a single line of code to create that. So invoice, we've already sent that print area, so that's fine. .export as a fixed file format. We're going to use a PDF to do that. And the file name is the file path. Now to what quality? We don't need to set that. Includes document properties. We don't need to set that. Ignore print areas. Of course, we don't want it to ignore. We want to keep those print areas. From to all the pages. Open after publish. Sure, why not? We'll do that. And then we can just do that. All right, so that's fine. That's sufficient for our purposes. All right, good. So we've set that. That's the macro. That's all we need to create. We're going to copy this macro here. And then we're going to assign it to that last button. Okay, so this save as PDF. Okay, we're going to set size and properties. So all I need to do is assign the macro actually. Save as PDF, click OK. Saving our work so far, always good to save before running macros. And then click Save as a PDF. It's going to get that invoice save message, which we did. We ran it, and there it is. And there it is inside that PDF, whatever your default PDF. It did set it to open. So here it is inside here. We can scroll up, making sure that saved automatically. Let me reduce it so we can see it in a smaller format. All right, that looks good. I like that. That's very, very nice. And we have a nice invoice that we've saved as a PDF. It looks good. We've got a missing border here, so I'm going to fix that. But otherwise, it looks good. So let's fix that missing border. So I'm going to right-click, format those cells, and set that border. Good. Let's preview that and make sure we got that border set up here. And it looks good. We got the border set up. Okay, I like that. That looks good. We got a missing border on the left side too. So this we gotta let's put the larger border here on the right. Format those cells here and add that big border on both the left and the right. That's what we want. A little more consistency with that. Okay, lastly, good. We're good to go on that. Last thing is we want to create this really cool a little chart. Like maybe let's call it. I'm going to insert. It's going to be based on this data here. So this data. We're going to use an insert. In this case, we're going to use probably a column, right? But don't use them on a 3D, but I'd like to use some kind of a stack chart like this one, a 2D stack chart. There's a few different ones we can do. So I like this one kind of here, but we don't want separate ones here. I really want them all the same. So I'm going to select the data here. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to switch those. So that's really what I want in essence, okay? So let's click OK. And then I'm going to change the colors. I'm going to do a lot of work with this. First thing is I don't need the grids. I'm going to delete that. I don't need borders here. I don't need the legend here on the left. Don't need this access. Don't need this. Don't need this, right? So we do need labels, and I'm going to format this, right? I want no fill on this shape, so we don't want any fill on this. I don't want any fill on this, no fill on this. And then, okay, good. And of course, no border. We don't need any borders on this. So again, no outline here, no outline. Okay, good. So I like the way that that looks so far, but we've got a little bit of work to do. I want to give it a nice green. So this is going to be our profit. So we want to add some data labels onto that, but let's go ahead and add all the data labels. And then I also want to add in, I'm going to update that and give it a little bit, move them off a little bit like here, and then here, and then let's say here, let's move those a little bit here, and then here. Good, I like that, but I also want to actually add some labels, right? So when I want to format those data labels, I want to make sure that we're going to include the series name on that, okay? I don't necessarily need a comma separator on that. And I want to do the same thing for this, right? I want to add that series name here and get rid of the comma here. And we'll format those, of course, accordingly. And then I want to do the same thing here. Series name, adding that profit, right, that we've created on our data and clearing that out. Okay, good. I like that. That looks pretty good, except I just want to add a bit of formatting. I want to give it that color that we've been using, maybe a consistent color. I want to make it bold and a little bit bigger here. I like that. Let's do the bold. Okay, good. I like that. Total sales. We're going to do the same thing here. Italicize. Let's do it bigger here, giving it that color here, and then doing the same thing here. All right, good. So we've gotten it the way we like it, making sure that they're all consistent. 10.5, 10, 11. This should be 11 here, and this should be 11, a little bit bigger. All right, and then we'll make it italicized. All right, so we've got the idea. I'm going to update these colors. I don't really like the colors, so I'm going to go ahead and format that data point there, and I want to work with the fill on that. So I want that profit to be green. I'm going to use a gradient, but I'm going to use this green. I only want 2 of those colors. So what we're going to do is we're going to start it out with a light green and then go. So maybe this green, and then we're going to go to this green here. Okay, yeah, I like that here for the net profit. So I'm going to do the same thing with the red, the total cost, and the total sales. So I'm clicking on this one, fill, and then we're going to use a gradient fill. This time we're going to go with the red. So I'll set this to maybe a light red here, and then we're going to set this one to a dark red here. Yeah, I like that. And then the last one, the blue, we're going to do something similar. Again, filling that, gradient fill. And then what we'll do is we'll set this one to, again, maybe this light blue and going over to this dark blue here. And that's going to give us, okay, so I like that. That looks good. And now what we do is what I want to give it that kind of a shape, that kind of dollar sign shape. So what I did is I created a picture. And I created just now, this is a see-through. So basically I created a PNG picture. And as you can see, it's just a dollar sign. So if I take this picture here, let's bring it, it's a little bit too big right now, but if I bring it in here, make it the same size as this picture here, we're going to get a kind of a cool look. And that's the look I'm looking for, right, is this. So now we just have to size it up accordingly, making sure it's as big as it. And that's cool. So now we see that we've got the total sales, the total things. And so now when we change, of course, we see that it's been changed. So now invoice 1, invoice 2, the numbers change, but the look doesn't. And that gives us a nice, cool look. All right, this has been a really, really fun and extra long training, as they all seem to be. But thank you so much. If you stuck out with the end, stuck out to the end, congratulate yourself, because this was a great training. We've learned how to create an incredible invoice with profit, complete with graph, complete with automated, fully costed out items and labor, ability to add customers through a great pop-up form, save, print invoices. Thank you so much. If you do like these trainings, don't forget to join us on Patreon. I'll be adding all these icons, shapes, resources, PDF code books, and a ton more on our Patreon platform. Of course, that's also with your feature, fix, or focus. If there's something I missed in here, some feature you'd like to see, I'll be doing that on Patreon this week. So make sure you get in our Patreon platform and let me know what you want to see. It's going to be really great. I cannot wait. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.